Hey guys, tonight we're plunging head first, well nose first, into one of the most misunderstood and romanticised periods in history. You know it, you've seen it in movies, knights in gleaming armour, maidens in flowing dresses, castles on hills and candlelit feasts. But here's the twist. Those movies forgot to include the human waste sloshing through the streets, the lice-infested tunics, and the constant, overpowering stench of rot, sweat and despair. You're going to learn why the Middle Ages were so filthy, so unthinkably rank, that honestly you probably wouldn't survive them. No offence. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not trying to emotionally manipulate you with guilt or anything, but I do hope we're building something cosy here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments what city you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing how far this sleepy little corner of the internet reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up, somehow, in a village somewhere in medieval England. The first thing you notice isn't the charming thatched roofs or the quaint marketplace, it's the smell. It wraps around you like a damp wool blanket that someone vomited on a few times and left in a horse stall all winter. Your eyes sting a little, your nostrils revolt. Welcome to your new reality. You're standing on a street. Though street is generous. It's more like a narrow, muddy pathway lined with crooked wooden houses leaning in like drunk uncles. The air is thick with smoke from a dozen fires. It's both musty and sharp, a combination of burning peat, rotting vegetables, livestock manure, and the unmistakable sour tang of human waste. You instinctively look for a trash can or sewer grate, or literally anything that could explain where all this filth is going. But here's the deal, it's not going anywhere. In this town, waste disposal is a free-for-all. People just throw their refuse, food scraps, spoiled meat, broken pottery, and yeah, full-on human excrement, right into the street. Some houses have upper floors with little windows where they dump chamber pots. Sometimes they shout a warning before launching it. Sometimes they don't. You hear someone yell, "Gardy-loo," from an open shutter and then splash. The street claims another victim. Your boots, by the way, are soaked. Not with rainwater, let's leave it at that. This isn't just your unlucky village. It's the norm across much of Europe. Urban planning in the Middle Ages is sort of like letting a toddler design a city using sticks, mud, and animal bones. Streets aren't paved unless you're in a Roman holdover, and even then the paving stones are slick with something you probably shouldn't identify. The idea of sanitation is so far from developed, it might as well be black magic. In fact, people genuinely believe smells cause disease, not germs, which makes sense because, well, this place smells like it's actively trying to kill you. And it's not just the street. Your body is part of the problem now too. Within hours of breathing this air and walking these roads, you've started sweating through your poorly sewn tunic. You haven't had a bath because, fun fact, no one really does that. Bathing is rare and kind of suspicious. People think hot water opens the pores to bad air and sickness. Honestly, they might be onto something, considering the water they're bathing in is likely drawn from the same river upstream where animals are drinking and peasants are dumping their waste. As you trudge past a butcher's stall, the scene gets even grimmer. There are flies absolutely having the time of their lives. Animal intestines hang from hooks like garlands at the worst party ever. There's no refrigeration, so meat sits out until someone buys it or the smell carries it away. Blood and bones pile up near the curb. Cats circle hungrily. Rats, already on the scene. One of them makes eye contact with you. You look away first. You try to escape to the edge of town where maybe nature will be more forgiving. But even here the fields are saturated with manure. It's used as fertilizer, sure, but there's no filter system. Rain just spreads it around like a gross medieval Instagram filter. Kids play in this muck, sometimes barefoot. Some of them smile at you, curious about the new stranger in town. You don't smile back. You're busy trying to keep your breakfast down. One fact that might surprise you. This isn't even the worst it gets. This is just average. This is a good day. You're not in a war zone or near a plague pit. There's no rotting battlefield outside the city gates. It's not market day, when everyone crowds in and doubles the funk levels. It's just a regular Tuesday, and the streets are basically composting in real time. And still, people live their lives, they're used to it. They trade, they marry, they farm, they gossip, they argue over who gets the next loaf of bread. The baker, by the way, is baking over a fire that's fueled by dried dung. It burns surprisingly well. The bread smells faintly of it. Not that anyone minds. Here's your quirky fact for the night. In some towns, the build-up of human waste and debris was so extreme that cities literally rose in elevation over time as new layers of buildings were constructed on top of old, trash-filled ones. You could say history just kept piling on, one stinking layer after another. And here's a scholarly debate that keeps medievalists up at night. Probably not literally, but let's pretend. Were the Middle Ages really this filthy across the board? Or are we projecting modern disgust onto a different way of life? Some historians argue that we exaggerate how dirty it was, pointing out that many towns had waste regulations, bathhouses, and even rudimentary sewage systems. Others respond, sure, but have you smelled it? Either way, you're here now. No deodorant, no toothpaste, no indoor plumbing, and that itch on your scalp, you'll want to ignore that. We'll get to lice in a bit. For now, just keep walking, carefully. That puddle ahead? It's not rain. You've barely survived your first few hours in this medieval village, and already your senses are in open rebellion. But just as you're adjusting to the street stew of mud, manure and mystery goop squishing between your toes, something comes flying out of a second-story window. You hear the unmistakable sound of liquid hitting cobblestone, and then the smell hits you. Yep, human waste. Again. You're getting to know it well. The townspeople are, let's say, casual about where and how they relieve themselves. You turn to see a woman leaning out her window, wiping her hands on her apron like she just tossed out the leftovers from lunch, not the contents of her chamber pot. No one's shocked. No one's disgusted. In fact, a cart driver steers his oxen through the splash zone without flinching. You, however, are staring in disbelief, wondering what it's like to be able to poop indoors and still somehow weaponize it. See, in the Middle Ages, the concept of a private bathroom doesn't exist for the average person. If you're lucky, your home has a wooden bucket or a ceramic pot tucked into a corner, basically a portable toilet with zero plumbing and a strong sense of betrayal. After doing your business, you just toss it out the window into the street. Gardez-loo is the courtesy call in places like Scotland. It's short for regardez-lo. Look out for the water, but let's be honest, by the time you hear it, it's too late. In bigger towns and cities, some wealthier homes and inns might have something called a garderobe. A little shelf built into a stone wall with a hole in the bottom. Beneath it, a chute that drops directly into the river, or a pit, or sometimes just onto the ground below. If you're in a castle, the chute might empty into the moat. And yes, that means the very water defending the castle from enemies is also doing double duty as a giant toilet. Moats. Less noble defence structure, more turd jacuzzi. Oh, and if you think public spaces are any better, nope. In many towns, communal latrines are basically wooden benches with holes over a trench. Sometimes they're maintained, sometimes they're just full, and when they are full, someone has to clean them out. Enter the gong farmer. This was a real job title, and yes, it's as bad as it sounds. Gong farmers were paid to climb down into cesspits and shovel out human waste by hand. Imagine that on your resume. Imagine the smell. Imagine the trench foot. Let's not forget chamber pots. Everyone uses them, from nobles to peasants. What separates the social classes is not whether you're flinging your bodily fluids into public spaces, but how stylish the pot is and whether you can pay someone else to do the flinging. Servants often had the noble task of emptying these vessels, sometimes into designated areas, sometimes into random ditches, sometimes into the same river that provides drinking water for half the town. It's a choose-your-own-adventure kind of hygiene system. Now brace yourself for a fringe fact. In medieval Paris, regulations did exist that required people to install little ledges beneath their upper-floor windows to deflect chamber pot contents away from pedestrians. This didn't stop anyone from tossing the contents, mind you. It just tried to reduce casualties. It's a very medieval solution to a very medieval problem. Sure, throw your poop out the window, but try not to kill anyone with it. The bar was low, and honestly people still tripped over it, but perhaps the weirdest part is how normalised all of this is. No one questions it. Children play in streets smeared with filth. Pigs and dogs root through it for snacks. Adults step over it like it's just another part of the landscape, and to them, it is. People aren't trying to be disgusting, it's just life. Sanitation, as a public concept, is centuries away from existing. There are no waste management services, no awareness of bacteria, and definitely no Lysol wipes. You deal with waste the way you deal with hunger. You make do, and you try not to die. Here's where things get interesting from a historical debate angle. Some historians argue that medieval societies weren't entirely clueless about hygiene. They point to city ordinances that fined people for dumping waste in front of neighbours' doors or in wells. Others note that monasteries often had surprisingly advanced waste channels, basically early plumbing, that kept the monks from living ankle-deep in their own filth. But here's the counterpoint. The very fact that fines and rules existed suggests that people were doing it all the time. A rule against dumping poop in the street only exists because people are, in fact, dumping poop in the street. And then there's you, modern, squishy, hyper-sanitized you, trying not to breathe through your nose as a barefoot child sprints past, splashing you with what you pray is just mud. You sidestep into what looks like a cleaner alley, only to discover it's where people go to privately relieve themselves when the line for the communal latrine is too long. A woman gives you a look like you're the rude one for interrupting. So if you're keeping a mental survival checklist, there are no toilets. Your only bathroom is a bucket, a hole in the floor or the side of a building. Any kind of privacy is a luxury. Cleaning products? Not a thing. And don't even ask about toilet paper. We'll get to that horror show later. You decide to climb a hill overlooking the town to catch your breath, and maybe catch less typhoid. The view is nice, actually. Smoke curling from chimneys, distant bells ringing from a church tower, and a couple of oxen plodding along a dirt road. From a distance, it almost looks quaint, picturesque even. But then a gust of wind brings the smell up to you again, and you remember. You're standing on a hill surrounded by thousands of people with no functioning sewage system, and tomorrow, it'll be worse. You wake up, if you can call it that, after a restless night spent curled up in the loft of a cottage with straw bedding that smells like wet goat and regret. Your muscles ache, your skin itches in new and interesting ways, and the taste in your mouth is what you imagine a medieval tavern floor must taste like after a long Saturday night. There's no toothbrush, no minty toothpaste, no running water. Your breath could take down a horse. Now imagine everyone around you also waking up with that same mouth. Morning greetings in this era. Less good morning and more please stand up wind. Dental hygiene, as you know it, doesn't exist. Toothbrushes won't appear in Europe until around the 17th century, and even then only the wealthy will have access to them. In the Middle Ages, if you want clean teeth, you're relying on chewing sticks, ashes, or rough cloth. That's if you even bother. Most people don't. Why would they? Their teeth are tools, used for breaking bread, tearing meat, and holding things when hands are busy. The result? Tooth decay is rampant. Not just cavities, but blackened teeth, exposed nerves, inflamed gums, and yes, the ever-popular medieval mouth rot. If your tooth starts hurting, you're in for a world of pain. There are no fillings, no Novocaine, no root canals. The go-to solution is a swift and brutal extraction, usually done by the local barber. That's right. Your barber is also your dentist and your minor surgeon. One-stop shopping. He sharpens his tools with the same enthusiasm he uses to sharpen his razors. There's no anaesthetic, just a swig of ale and someone to hold you down. The sound of cracking enamel and screaming. Completely normal. Your breath, meanwhile, smells like old meat left out in the sun. Everyone's does. Halitosis isn't a personal hygiene issue. It's a shared community vibe. If you want to freshen up, your options include chewing mint leaves, rinsing with wine, not a terrible idea honestly, or praying. In fact, many people believe bad breath is caused by imbalances in the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile and yellow bile. Because medieval medicine really leaned into that whole trial and error without the trial approach. Now, just for fun, let's take a look at what your diet's doing to those poor teeth. Bread is a staple, but it's not like your nice fluffy sourdough from the farmer's market. Medieval bread is coarse, often filled with bits of grit and stone from the millstones used to grind the grain. Every bite is like chewing a gravel smoothie. Over time, it wears your teeth down to sad little nubs. Combine that with the sugar rush from preserved fruits, honey, and the occasional mead binge, and your teeth never stood a chance. Even nobility, with their access to slightly better food and imported spices, aren't spared. In fact, they might be worse off. Their love of sweets and fine wines accelerates tooth decay, and they often flaunt their blackened teeth like status symbols, proof that they can afford the good stuff, even if it's slowly rotting their faces from the inside. Let's detour into something delightfully weird. Did you know that some medieval people believed in something called toothworms? That's right. They thought tiny worms lived inside your teeth and caused pain when they moved. These mythical critters were blamed for toothaches, and treatments included smoking them out with burning herbs, or chanting incantations to banish them. One 10th century cure involved heating a mix of onions, donkey fat, and crushed herbs inside a hollowed-out turnip, then holding it to your cheek while hoping the worms got bored and left, as you do. There's some scholarly debate on how common tooth loss really was in the Middle Ages. Skeletal remains show that many people, especially peasants, retained a surprising number of their teeth into old age, possibly because they ate less sugar and processed food than later generations. But here's the twist. Having teeth doesn't mean having healthy teeth. Those skulls often show extreme wear, abscesses, and signs of chronic gum disease. It's survival in name only. Back in your grimy village, a man you met yesterday is limping toward the market square, clutching his jaw and wincing. You can see the swelling. His entire cheek is puffed up like he's hiding a boiled egg in it. He's going to the barber surgeon. You consider following him. You shouldn't, but you do. The barbershop is dark and smells like iron and old blood. The tools sit in a basin of cloudy water. Hooks, forceps, and what looks like a pair of rusty pliers are all casually laid out on the table, like they're part of a charcuterie board from hell. There's no curtain, no privacy. The man sits in a chair, and without much ceremony, the barber leans in and yanks the offending tooth. It takes 2 tries. You flinch harder than he does. When it's over, the man is handed a cloth for the blood and a sip of something strong. You leave before you vomit. So much for breakfast. Feeling a little queasy? Good. You should. Your jaw hurts in sympathy, and your mouth suddenly feels way too crowded with teeth. That's normal. Modern dentistry has spoiled you. You get cleanings, whitening strips and ceramic crowns. Here you get a mouthful of rot and the comforting belief that worms are eating your molars from the inside out. By midday you're desperate for some kind of mint or even a clove, but instead a villager hands you a lump of resin to chew. It's meant to clean your mouth, but it's basically pine-flavoured tar. You gag a little, smile politely and try not to swallow it. A child nearby is picking something from their teeth with a chicken feather. Charming. The afternoon sun makes everything worse. Heat brings the smells of the village into sharp, vivid focus. The butcher's stall reeks. The tannery smells like a crime scene. And people? People are walking air freshener disasters carrying the musk of sweat, mouldy wool and dental decay. You're not immune. You're part of the smell now. You are the smell. And still life goes on. People talk, laugh, barter, flirt. Their breath is foul, their teeth are yellow or missing, and their gums are barely hanging in there, but they're alive. You, on the other hand, are seriously considering trading your soul for a toothbrush and 2 minutes with fluoride. It's been a full day now, and the novelty is wearing off fast. You're still reeling from the whole dental disasters and portable toilets situation, but just when you think it can't get worse, it does, because tonight you're sharing your bedding, not with a person, with lice and fleas, and quite possibly something that just laid eggs somewhere near your collarbone. Your host family, who, bless them, have been feeding you turnip stew and treating you like one of their own, offers you a space near the hearth. The warmth is welcome, the scratchy wool blanket less so, but you're not in a position to complain. You curl up trying to ignore the sharp itch in your scalp and that mysterious crawling feeling on your leg. You tell yourself it's just your imagination. It is not. You're about to meet the most intimate part of medieval living, shared infestations. Lice are everywhere, on everyone, even the nobility, even monks. No one is safe. In fact, lice are so common, they're basically part of your social identity. Your clothing has them, your bedding has them, your hair is their condo, and honestly they're thriving. In the Middle Ages, people wear their clothes until they disintegrate. Washing garments is rare because it's labour intensive, and most folks only own 1 or 2 outfits. So these outfits, woolen tunics, linen underclothes and all, become paradise for lice and fleas, especially the warm, cosy spots where your body naturally sweats. Your armpits, party zone, behind the knees, rave central, and your groin. Don't even go there. Literally, don't go there. You hear the scratching before you see it. One of the kids, maybe 7 or 8 years old, is sitting by the fire going to town on his scalp like he's trying to dig a tunnel. You glance at him, and he grins at you. In his hand, a louse. Plucked victoriously from his hair. Without hesitation, he pops it between his thumbnails. Snap. This is daily life. Now here's a fun fringe fact. Some medieval people use special combs, very fine-toothed, to rake lice out of their hair. These nick combs were carved from bone or wood, and they're actually beautiful little tools, like someone tried to make Parasites into an aesthetic. There were also louse-catching rituals, especially in monasteries, where monks would comb each other's robes and casually squish what they found. Brotherly bonding through blood-sucking insects. Nothing says fellowship like communal pest control. You, being modern and fragile, are trying not to cry. You feel them now, crawling, hiding in the seams of your borrowed tunic, lurking under the waistband of your hose. You discreetly scratch your scalp. Big mistake. You find something, you pinch it, you squish it, you wish you were dead. And then there are the fleas. Not to be outdone by their lice cousins, these little jumpers are the extroverts of the medieval parasite world. They're everywhere, but especially where animals sleep. And animals, by the way, live with people. Chickens underfoot, pigs in the courtyard, the occasional goat tied to a bedpost. There's no separation. Fleas leap from beast to man like it's a neighbourhood block party. You can feel their tiny bites along your ankles and wrists, 1,000 little itches erupting at once. Welcome to the Middle Ages. Here's where things take a darker turn. While lice are mostly just gross and annoying, fleas are deadly. They're the primary carriers of Yersinia pestis, the bacteria that causes bubonic plague. Yes, that plague. The Black Death. The one that killed nearly half of Europe's population in the 14th century. So when you feel a flea bite, you're not just annoyed. You're thinking, is this how it starts? A bump, a fever, a boil the size of a plum, and then lights out. Of course, at this point in history, no one knows fleas carry disease. The idea that tiny organisms can cause illness is centuries away. Instead, people blame miasmas, bad air, or sin. Always sin. If you're sick, clearly you offended God or failed to give proper alms or had impure thoughts. Spoiler, you've had plenty of those. You're toast either way. There's scholarly debate about how seriously people took personal cleanliness in this era. Some records show that monks bathed regularly, at least a few times a year, and towns had bathhouses where people could scrub off the filth. But those same bathhouses were often shut down by the church for being associated with immoral behaviour. Translation: people were getting frisky in the hot tubs. So even when people wanted to clean up, the system worked against them. And bathing doesn't necessarily help with lice anyway. These critters cling to clothing more than skin. To get rid of them, you'd need to boil your clothes, beat them with sticks, or hang them in bright sun, which isn't always possible when you're a peasant who owns exactly one threadbare shirt, and it's raining for the 5th day in a row. So most folks just live with it. Scratch, squish, repeat. The itch is now constant. You've stopped pretending. You're scratching openly, desperately, like you're trying to peel yourself out of your own skin. One of the older women sees you and chuckles. She hands you a comb. You take it with thanks and a grim nod, knowing exactly what you're about to find. You sit near the fire, pulling the comb through your hair. Every few strokes you flick a louse into the flames. It sizzles and pops like a tiny kernel of disgusting popcorn. It's horrifying, but also kind of satisfying. There's a strange rhythm to it, this mutual suffering. You're bonding with the villagers in a way that transcends language, united in filth. You ask quietly if there's anything else that can help. The woman offers you a paste made of crushed garlic and goose fat. For the lice, she says. You smear it along your scalp and the smell is overwhelming. But it works, sort of. The lice don't like it. Of course, now you smell like a medieval stew gone rogue, but that's everyone's default perfume anyway. By the time you lie back down, your head is greasy, your skin is crawling, and you're vaguely terrified you're now hosting an entire micro-ecosystem. You are. Everyone is. This is just how it is. Hygiene isn't a personal pursuit here. It's a dream, a fantasy. A story peasants tell their children before bed. Once upon a time, someone bathed twice in 1 week, and the lice all cried. You scratch one last time before falling asleep and accept your new reality. You're a human scratching post now, and tomorrow you find out what people wear under all these layers, and why it's even worse than you think. You wake up groggily, if you can call that state awake. It's more like being dragged from the bottom of a filthy pond still clinging to the sludge. Your head is itchy, your scalp smells like garlic and poultry fat, and your body is stiff from sleeping on what was essentially a hay-filled sack with the supportive qualities of a pile of old ropes. But today brings a new horror, one you haven't fully appreciated until now: medieval fashion. At first glance, people here look kind of layered, that's the word. Lots of fabric, lots of drapey silhouettes, and everyone seems to be melting slowly under the weight of their own clothing. But once you're dressed, and let's be honest, dressed by someone because these outfits require help, you realise the real nightmare isn't what you see. It's what you feel crawling underneath. You're wearing a tunic made of wool. It's coarse, itchy. It smells like the sheep it came from, mixed with the smoke of 100 fires and a bit of mildew for good measure. Beneath that, a linen undergarment clings to your skin, if you're lucky enough to even have one. Most peasants don't. The underclothes are meant to protect your outer garments from sweat and body grime, but in reality they just trap it. It's like wearing a wool-lined sauna powered by your own body heat. You ask a local about washing clothes, just to see if anyone else is suffering as much as you. She shrugs and tells you the usual. Clothing gets beaten in rivers or scrubbed with lye only a few times a year, and often only when the garment is so stiff with dirt and oil it can practically stand on its own. For most people, that means you sleep, eat, work, and, yes, relieve yourself, all while wearing the same crusty layers for weeks. You think about your hoodie back home and nearly cry. Oh, and here's the part you've been dreading. Undergarments. If you're a man, your medieval wardrobe includes brays, baggy linen shorts held up by a drawstring. Think diaper, but less secure. If you're a woman, you wear a long chemise or shift. Underwear in the modern sense isn't really a thing. There are no cotton briefs, no elastic, no moisture-wicking anything. You're marinating in your own sweat, and everyone else's too. By midday, the sun turns your outfit into a woolen pressure cooker. You feel every seam, every fold, every damp inch, and when you try to scratch, because the lice have not left, oh no, they scurry deeper into the folds of your clothing. You're officially sharing your outfit with more creatures than you can count, and you're not alone. Clothing here isn't just infested, it's basically a timeshare for parasites. The fleas jump between you and the shepherd next to you like you're both stops on a scenic tour of Itchtown. Let's pause for a bizarre but true medieval fashion tidbit. Some people literally kept lice-catching belts. These were leather or cloth straps treated with grease or blood to lure the insects away from the skin. You'd wear it under your clothes and then, at the end of the day, scrape off the bugs like some kind of horrifying pest casserole. You wonder, briefly, if that would be better than what you're wearing now. Honestly, it might. Now, let's talk shoes, because believe it or not, your feet are about to suffer too. Medieval footwear is simple. Soft leather soles, no arch support, and about as breathable as a sandwich bag. These shoes fill with sweat almost immediately. You think back to your running shoes with their clever little mesh panels and cushioned heels, and suddenly understand just how spoiled you were. What's worse, shoes often double as breeding grounds for mould, especially in damp climates. It's not uncommon for people to get foot infections, trench foot, or even lose toes from constant exposure to cold and wet conditions. The term keeping your feet dry isn't just good advice, it's practically life or death. But in the Middle Ages, good luck with that. The roads are muddy, the floors are dirt, everything leaks, your shoes are wet within the hour and they will stay that way until they rot off your feet. And here's the real kicker. You can't just take things off to feel better. Modesty and social norms are strict. Even peasants have rules about what's appropriate, and walking around half-dressed is seen as weird at best, sinful at worst. So you suffer quietly, pulling at the seams of your tunic, trying to shift the lice without looking like you're hosting a full-body exorcism. There's a strange comfort in knowing this suffering is universal. Everyone around you is going through it. The blacksmith, covered in soot, sweat, and lice. The baker smells like bread and feet. The priest, no better. His robes hide it, but he's got the same problem under there. Layers upon layers of clothing that haven't been washed in a season. Even the nobility with their silks and velvets aren't free from the grime. If anything, they're worse off. Silk holds in sweat like nothing else, and perfume just adds another note to the symphony of stink. Some historians argue that the poor were ironically cleaner in some ways. Peasants often bathed in rivers during the summer, while nobles avoided water out of fear it would weaken them or open their pores to disease. You think of the river you passed earlier, filled with laundry suds, animal waste and a floating pig carcass, and try to imagine feeling refreshed after a dip. Hard pass. But maybe the most surprising thing about medieval clothing isn't how gross it is. It's how little it changes. Fashion is a slow-moving beast in this era. Trends take decades to shift. People wear what works, what lasts, and what their status allows. And unless you're a noble with disposable income, your clothes might be inherited, patched 100 times, and so full of holes that you're technically always half naked, but politely so. By evening, your linen shift is plastered to your skin with sweat. You've counted 4 flea bites, 1 very suspicious rash, and something that might be a louse nest behind your left ear. You don't want to know. You try to peel the tunic off, but the dried sweat glues it to your body like medieval shrink wrap. When you finally get it off, the smell hits you. You sit there, half naked, lice-ridden, feet blistered, wondering how anyone in this time ever managed to fall in love. Then someone farts audibly nearby, and the entire family laughs like it's a perfectly normal, delightful thing, which of course it is. The next morning you wake up already sweating. The wool tunic you peeled off last night sits balled up in the corner, holding its shape a little too well, like it's now more crust than cloth. You eye it warily, as if it might crawl away on its own. Your feet are raw from yesterday's journey, your scalp still itches, and there's a new set of flea bites forming an abstract pattern on your ankle that could probably be classified as medieval modern art. But today's horror doesn't come from clothing, it comes from food. You shuffle into the main room where your host family is preparing breakfast. The fire's been lit since before dawn, and the smell in the air is complicated. On one hand, you get a warm, earthy scent of baking bread. On the other hand, there's a tang of sour milk and something else that smells like it's been dead a while and just remembered it. You try to keep your hopes low. It's safer that way. They hand you a wooden bowl with something lumpy and greyish inside. It's a kind of porridge, made from barley or oats and water, boiled until it forms a texture somewhere between wet plaster and disappointment. It's warm though, and not entirely terrible. You take a bite. It's bland but safe. You relax. That's your mistake. Because lunch? That's when it goes downhill fast. Meat is on the menu today. A small miracle. But here's the thing. In the Middle Ages, meat is both rare and risky. Most peasants don't get it often. When they do, it's either been salted beyond recognition to preserve it, or it's less than fresh. Your meal today is a hunk of mutton that smells vaguely fermented. You poke it with your spoon, it jiggles. That's never a good sign. You glance around. Everyone else is digging in like it's perfectly normal, and for them, it is. Their bodies are used to food that would send yours into a full gastrointestinal shutdown. Yours is soft and pampered. Yours has been raised on expiry dates and refrigeration. Yours is about to enter its final form, the medieval regret spiral. With cautious optimism, you take a bite. The texture is stringy, the flavour sour and strangely sweet, like someone marinated it in despair and fruit wine. You chew, you swallow, you immediately regret everything. See, there's no cold storage here. Meat is preserved with salt, smoke, or by simply hoping winter comes fast enough to kill the bacteria. Spoilage is common, but because food is scarce, you eat it anyway. People season meat with strong spices not for flavour, but to mask the rot. And sometimes the spices don't work. You're not tasting the meat. You're tasting the slow crawl of decay disguised with cloves. And meat isn't the only hazard. Bread, that staple of life, isn't always safe either. Rye, one of the most common grains used by peasants, has a little fungal hitchhiker called ergot. When consumed, ergot can cause hallucinations, convulsions, vomiting, and death. Think of it as medieval LSD, but with more screaming and less cool album covers. Entire villages have been poisoned by bad bread. It's called St. Anthony's fire because of the burning sensations in the limbs, and it's one of the more quietly terrifying things baked into your lunch. You ask someone if they worry about food going bad. They shrug. If it smells worse than the barn, don't eat it. It's not exactly the FDA, but it's something. By late afternoon, your stomach is staging a small rebellion. You feel a rumble. You try to ignore it. You fail. Nature calls, and once again, you're forced to revisit the bathroom situation, which, if you recall, involves a bucket and public shame. After taking care of business in a corner outhouse that's more hole than structure, you begin to understand why so many people back then just didn't live that long. Here's a weird little fact to help distract you from your cramping. There were times when fish were reclassified by the church to count as non-meat, just so people could still eat them on fasting days. Beavers were considered fish because they lived in water. So yes, someone in a robe officially decided beaver tail is seafood. Logic? Optional. Of course, all this is happening in a society where the idea of nutrition is, shall we say, primitive. The four humours rule everything. Your health, your food, your mood. Hot foods balance cold moods. Dry foods balance wet temperaments. If you're depressed, you need more hot and dry foods. If you have a fever, eat something cold and moist. None of this is based on actual biology. It's more like mood-based astrology, but with soup. And don't forget, all of this food has been prepared without the help of modern sanitation. The wooden cutting boards aren't cleaned, just scraped. The knives have been used to gut a chicken, cut kindling, and stir a stew, possibly all in the same hour. Flies buzz around freely. Leftovers are left out overnight. You've seen mould, and mould has seen you. There's some scholarly debate over just how dangerous medieval food really was. Some argue that people developed tough stomachs and immune systems capable of handling all this. Others point to archaeological remains and accounts of frequent food poisoning outbreaks and quietly say, nope, it was bad. You're inclined to agree with the latter, especially after your second trip to the outhouse, and a growing sense that your lunch is trying to escape your body by any means necessary. As night falls, someone brings out a flask of ale. It's warm, flat, and a little sour, but you drink it gladly. It's safer than water. Honestly, it might be the only thing keeping you alive at this point. You're lightheaded, sweating, and starting to see double, but at least it's not from ergot hallucinations. Probably. You crawl into your lice-ridden blanket, curl up on your haymat, and try to forget the taste of spoiled meat. Your stomach gurgles ominously. You whisper to yourself, "This is fine." It is not fine. Tomorrow you learn why everyone, yes, everyone, drinks beer instead of water, including toddlers. Sleep tight. It's the next morning, and you open your eyes to the sound of clanging. Someone's hammering something just outside the cottage, but more urgently your mouth is dry. Bone dry. Like you just swallowed a handful of dust and regret. Your tongue feels like a scrap of wool that's been left out in the sun. You reach instinctively for water, because that's what a modern person does. And then you remember, no plumbing, no clean tap, no filtered bottle with electrolytes and branding that says Mountain Ice Blast. Just a jug of something sitting by the hearth. You peer into it. It's not clear water. It's amber, murky. A few floating bits of who knows what drift near the surface. You sniff it, then pull back. Nope. That's not water. That's a dare. You look around and see what everyone else is drinking. It's not water either. It's ale. Warm, cloudy, weak ale. Even the kids are drinking it. There's a boy no older than 6 casually sipping from a clay cup like it's his morning juice box. You raise your eyebrows, but no one bats an eye. This is normal here. And here's the shocking part. It kind of makes sense. Water, in the Middle Ages, is terrifying. Sure, it exists in wells and rivers and rain barrels, but most of it is contaminated with human and animal waste. You've seen what people dump in the streets. Now imagine what they dump in rivers, and then imagine drinking from it. Yeah, people who drink water often get sick, and they don't understand why. There's no germ theory, no awareness of bacteria or parasites. All they know is that water from some places makes you violently ill, while beer, somehow, doesn't. That's because ale is boiled during brewing, which, though unintentional, kills off most of the harmful microbes. It's not strong, barely alcoholic by modern standards, but it's safer than water, so people drink it all the time. Morning, noon and night. It's not a party beverage, it's hydration. Medieval Gatorade, if you will. You sip from the communal jug and try not to make a face. It's sour, yeasty and warm, but not awful. It kind of grows on you. Or maybe your standards are plummeting. Either way, it's better than the bucket water with a dead bug doing a backstroke in it. You start to notice it everywhere now. The baker drinks while kneading dough. The blacksmith gulps it between hammer swings. Monks sip it while copying manuscripts. Even hospital patients are given ale instead of water. And not just any ale, small beer, a weaker version made for daily consumption. It has enough alcohol to kill germs, but not enough to make people drunk, unless they drink a lot, which, honestly, they do. Here's a quirky fact for your brain to sip on. Some monks brewed beer as a kind of liquid meal during fasting periods. They called it liquid bread. Some of the brews were so strong that they were basically nutritional smoothies with a kick, and they were proud of it. Brewing became an art form in monasteries, one of the few places where science and hygiene made slow but steady progress. Now this isn't to say everyone avoided water. In rural areas where a well was deep and protected, clean water was possible, and rainwater, if collected carefully, could be safe. But most towns and cities had such poor infrastructure that the risks outweighed the benefits. It didn't help that many people dumped waste right next to their water sources. Wells got contaminated, and rivers ran brown after storms. You remember that stream you crossed on your first day here? The one with the rainbow-coloured scum drifting downstream? That's the village's main water source, and you stepped in it. Twice. Scholars debate how much of medieval beer consumption was about safety versus tradition. Some argue that ale was just part of the culture, cheap, easy to make, and an efficient way to use surplus grain. Others point to records of chronic diarrhea, cholera outbreaks, and unexplained fevers and say, nope. People knew water made them sick, even if they didn't know why. They figured out a workaround. Boil grain water, let it ferment, and boom, hydration that doesn't kill you. Mostly. You hear a loud belch from the next room. One of the older women wipes her mouth with her sleeve and goes right back to spinning wool. No one flinches. Decorum is flexible when everyone smells like mouldy barley anyway. And here's another delightful twist. Water was considered suspicious for other reasons too. Bathing in it could be dangerous, people thought. Drinking it might thin the blood. Some physicians believed that cold water unbalanced the humours and led to sluggishness or melancholy. Others just flat out said it was unclean in a spiritual sense. So even when water looked clear, people still distrusted it. Superstition, survival, and science-ish logic all combined into a collective cultural side-eye toward anything that didn't come with hops. You try to imagine a modern family dinner with everyone passing around a pitcher of beer for the toddlers, grandma and pregnant cousin to enjoy equally. It's comical. But here, it's reality. There's even a term for beer rationing in workhouses and monasteries. Labourers might be granted a gallon or more per day. They pace themselves, sure, but still, it's a boozy existence. And that weak ale is fueling an entire society. The more you watch, the more you realise. No one drinks water alone. It's often mixed with vinegar, a weird tangy concoction called posca, or turned into broth, or boiled into tea-like tisanes with herbs. Anything to reduce the risk. Anything to avoid pure water. By afternoon you're feeling lightheaded. You haven't eaten much and the ale is starting to catch up with you. Not drunk exactly, just off. You stumble a bit as you help carry firewood, and someone chuckles. They clap you on the back and say something that roughly translates to lightweight. You nod and fake a laugh. Meanwhile, your stomach is gurgling again. Is it the beer? The mutton from yesterday? The sheer psychological trauma? Who can say? Later, as you sit near the fire, someone passes you a flask of stronger stuff. Mead, maybe. Honey wine. It's cloying and thick and hits fast. You decline after one sip. You need to be awake tomorrow, for whatever fresh medieval horror awaits. You already feel your immune system filing a resignation letter. You stare into the fire, the smell of roasted onions and damp wool in your nostrils, your belly sloshing with weak ale, your skin crawling with fleas, and your mouth tasting like someone chewed bread and spat it into your cup. You're hydrated now. Congratulations. But at what cost? Sometime in the middle of the night you wake up sweating, not from the lice or the wool or even the lingering hangover from weak ale, but from something deeper, more primal. A tight pain is curling in your gut, like a medieval fist slowly twisting your intestines into a balloon animal. You clutch your stomach, eyes wide in the dark, and think, this is it. I'm dying. You stumble out of the cottage and make your way toward the outhouse, but halfway there, the world tilts. Your knees buckle, and you drop to the ground, hugging yourself in a fetal position beside what may or may not be a chicken. It clucks judgmentally and wanders off. The pain builds, sharp and unforgiving, and in that moment, you realise that you, soft modern human, have been body slammed by one of the most consistent forces in medieval life: disease. There's no avoiding it. You've seen the filth, breathed the air, eaten the questionable meat, drank the slightly sketchy ale, and slept among enough parasites to qualify as an ecosystem. Of course, your body is rebelling. This place is a living, breathing petri dish. People here are always sick. Coughing, limping, bleeding, moaning. Illness is not the exception. It's the background noise of daily life. You survive the night, barely. In the morning, someone hands you a stale piece of bread and tells you to chew slowly. For the humours. You manage a few bites, but your insides feel like they're doing battle with a demon. The worst part? No one's particularly concerned. People here don't panic over illness unless you're actively dying in front of them, and even then, it's more of a whelp that happens shrug than any real alarm. This brings us to a delightful little list of what you're likely dealing with. First, the classics: dysentery, typhoid, and food poisoning. All from contaminated water, spoiled food, and poor hygiene. Then we move into the crowd favourites: leprosy, tuberculosis, and smallpox. Each one making its way through medieval communities like a terrible celebrity tour. You haven't even seen a plague pit yet. That's coming, don't worry. And then there's the wild card: ergotism. Remember the rye bread. If it's infected with ergot fungus, your symptoms might include burning limbs, hallucinations, and convulsions. Some historians even argue that entire villages acted bizarrely, dancing uncontrollably, babbling nonsense, or collapsing from phantom pain because of long-term exposure to ergot. People thought they were cursed. In reality, they were poisoned by toast. You shuffle through the village, pale and trembling. A woman with a runny nose sneezes directly into her sleeve and continues kneading dough without flinching. Someone coughs violently behind you, a deep hacking sound that echoes off the stone wall. You see a man with a bandage over his eye stained with something dark and suspicious. No one is isolating, no one's masking, everyone's just dealing with it. Now, let's talk plague, the big one. The Black Death, also known as the bubonic plague, won't hit Europe until the 14th century, but the bacteria that causes it, Yersinia pestis, has been around for centuries, and when it does hit, it wipes out an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population. That's not just bad, that's civilization-breaking bad. Fleas from rats carry it, and those fleas live with people, like, on them, in their clothes, in their bedding. So even if you're not near a battlefield or a famine, the real danger is already in your shirt. Here's a disturbing fringe fact. During plague years, plague doctors wore beaked masks filled with herbs and spices to block the bad air. The idea was that smell carried disease, so by sniffing lavender and cinnamon through a bird mask, they'd protect themselves. It didn't work, obviously, but they looked terrifying enough to inspire centuries of nightmares. If you were a medieval physician, and were using that word very generously, you'd treat illness by adjusting your patient's humours. That might mean bloodletting, purging with laxatives, or forcing the poor soul to drink a mixture of crushed snails and vinegar. The results? Let's just say most patients died of the treatment, not the illness. The medical field was essentially medieval improv, with leeches. You sit down near the edge of the village, still woozy. A chicken hops onto your foot. You don't move, you don't have the strength. A local healer stops by and offers you something that smells like burnt onions and despair. You drink it. Of course you do. What's the worst that could happen? But, and here's the genuinely strange part, some of the herbal remedies do work. Medieval healers, especially women, had generations of knowledge about plants, poultices and tinctures. Yarrow for wounds, chamomile for stomach cramps, willow bark for pain, basically nature's aspirin. These things helped, at least sometimes. But of course, they were often blended with other, far less helpful ingredients, like powdered toad, or mercury, or holy water blessed 3 times under a full moon. You drag yourself back into the cottage by sunset. Your host gives you a sympathetic look and tells you to sleep close to the fire. It will balance your inner coldness. You nod weakly, clutching your belly, trying to keep your soul from exiting your body through your mouth. The bed smells like wet straw and old feet. You lie there, shaking, sweating, thinking about everything that could be wrong with you. And then you remember there are no hospitals, no antibiotics, no clinics. You can't Google your symptoms. You can't call your doctor. You can't even explain what's wrong without someone blaming sin or the stars. You're sick in a world that doesn't fully understand sickness. And it's terrifying. There's a final, quiet thought that creeps in as your eyes close. People didn't just die from disease. They lived with it. Constantly. It was part of the scenery. Part of the rhythm. People married, worked, and raised children in between outbreaks. Babies were born next to coughing grandmothers. Markets stayed open while people dropped in the streets. Death was familiar, expected, and often shrugged at with a weary nod. You curl tighter under the blanket. A new bite appears on your arm. You don't even bother looking. If the plague doesn't get you, the ale might. Or the mutton. Or the man who keeps sneezing into his hands and then handing out bread. Either way, tomorrow is another day, probably. You survive the night. Technically. You're not sure how, but by the time the sun rises and begins spilling its pale, chilly light across the dirt floor of the cottage, you're still breathing. Barely. Your stomach has settled into a tense truce with whatever demon possessed it yesterday, and you're now just exhausted. Haunted. Like someone who's seen the inside of a medieval latrine one too many times. But today, you're promised something different. A little hope, maybe. A man down the road says he's got medical knowledge, and you're desperate enough to listen. So you're led to the edge of the village where a tiny lopsided hut leans against a tree like it gave up holding itself upright centuries ago. Outside, bundles of herbs dangle from ropes, and something in a jar is definitely floating in some kind of liquid you don't want to identify. A hand-carved sign reads, "Physician." Well, that's encouraging. You duck inside and meet the so-called doctor. He's wearing a robe with mysterious stains and a cap that looks like it was made out of someone's former pet. He greets you with confidence, which is impressive considering what he's about to do. You tell him your symptoms: fever, stomach cramps, aching limbs, hallucinations, which may or may not have just been you making eye contact with a goose for too long. He nods sagely and says, "Your humours are out of balance." Ah yes, the humours. The core belief of medieval medicine, passed down from ancient Greek physicians and clung to with the same stubbornness people today reserve for detox tea. The body, according to this system, is governed by 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If you're sick, it means one of them has taken over the party, and it needs to be put in its place. The doctor suggests bleeding. Of course he does. You agree because you have no options, and soon you're seated on a rickety stool, while he unwraps a small knife and a bowl. He assures you it won't hurt much. He lies. The blade nicks your arm and blood begins to flow into the bowl. You try to remain calm, but your vision starts to fuzz at the edges. You've barely recovered from yesterday's mystery meat. Now you're losing blood for balance. And then, because your luck is clearly cursed, he pulls out a jar of leeches. Yes, the little slimy creatures that look like angry raisins with teeth. He places one on your wrist and explains, quite proudly, that these leeches know exactly how much blood to take. You're not convinced, especially as one starts wiggling toward your thumb joint like it's found the dessert menu. While you bleed, for your health obviously, he offers you a syrupy tonic made from elderflower, honey, and something that tastes suspiciously like wet bark. You sip it anyway. He then begins inspecting your tongue, your pulse, and your eyes. Each examination followed by a muttered diagnosis that sounds more poetic than medical. "Liver wind," he says at one point. You don't even ask. And here's the fringe fact of the day. Barbers, not doctors, were often the go-to for procedures like tooth pulling, bloodletting, and amputations. Physicians dealt with diagnosis and theory. Surgeons, if you could find one, handled the grisly stuff. But barber surgeons? They were your multitasking horror show. A shave, a haircut, and a nice arterial bleed, all in one convenient sitting. And they were surprisingly common. There's a debate among historians about how useless medieval medicine really was. On the one hand, there are documented procedures, herbal remedies, and even early forms of surgery that worked better than you'd expect. On the other hand, a lot of it involved guesswork, astrology, prayer, and purging people until they were too weak to complain. It wasn't all nonsense, but it wasn't exactly the Mayo Clinic either. Back in the hut, the leeches are removed, fat and wriggling, full of your precious blood, and tossed into a bowl with an air of finality. The doctor bandages your arm with a strip of cloth dipped in something herbal and sticky. You pay him in the only currency available, 2 buttons from your tunic and a handful of barley. He seems pleased. You stagger out dizzy, wondering if you've just been healed or lightly murdered. The world spins gently as you make your way back toward the village. You pass a young girl with a swollen eye and a man who coughs so violently he nearly doubles over. No one stops to help. Everyone is sick. Everyone is dying. But slowly, over years, not hours. It's a kind of drawn-out decline that people just accept as the rhythm of life. You rest near a low stone wall, trying to recover from your treatment. The air smells like peat smoke, sheep, and fermented turnips. The flies have returned. You're aware of every itchy, crawling sensation under your clothes. You haven't been truly clean since arriving. You're convinced you never will be again. And then someone mentions the leper's bell. You turn, and down the road comes a gaunt figure in a tattered cloak carrying a staff and ringing a small bell with each step. The villagers move aside. Some make the sign of the cross, some just turn away. Leprosy, what we now call Hansen's disease, is feared more than anything here. Not necessarily because it's deadly, but because of what it does to you. It disfigures, it isolates, it marks you as cursed. Leprosy sufferers are often forced to wear bells, announcing their approach so others can flee. They're banished to the edges of town, or into leper colonies where they live and die together, forgotten by the world. You watch as the man walks past, silent but for the haunting jingle of his bell, and wonder if he even remembers what it's like to be touched by another human being. You return to the cottage just before sunset, arms aching, skin pale, eyes heavy. You curl up on your haymat without eating. You don't care. You've been bled, licked by leeches, and handed a diagnosis of bad wind. You feel worse than you did this morning, which must mean you're getting better. That's how it works here, right? You wake up to a strange noise. Not the usual chickens clucking or someone vomiting discreetly into a corner pot. No, this is different. Chanting. Rhythmic and low, almost musical. You rise slowly, every joint complaining, and peek outside. A procession is winding through the village. At the front, a group of barefoot men, their robes dark with sweat and dust, swing incense burners that puff clouds of something herbal and bitter into the morning air. Behind them, more men walk slowly, murmuring prayers and occasionally stopping to bow. You ask what's going on. Someone whispers, "It's the penitents." They're warding off the demons. You've stumbled right into one of the stranger corners of medieval medical theory. Spiritual illness. Sure, they believe in bad air and unbalanced humours, but many folks still cling to an older, more ancient fear. That disease is punishment. For sin. For lust. For pride. For something your uncle did 3 harvests ago. You name it. Someone's blaming it. The procession continues. Some of the men begin flogging themselves with ropes and leather straps, leaving red marks along their backs and shoulders. Blood spatters onto the dusty road. A child watches wide-eyed, clutching a turnip. You watch too, stuck somewhere between horror and mild concern for their backs. One man chants a warning in Latin about contagion and pestilence. The villagers throw handfuls of herbs, rosemary, sage, marjoram, into the street, hoping to please whatever force might be watching. The smoke from the incense is thick now, mingling with the ever-present stench of livestock and unwashed bodies. It burns your eyes. Someone hands you a nosegay, a little bundle of dried flowers and herbs, to hold under your nose. You feel like you're in a twisted Renaissance fair run by apocalyptic street performers. You ask a nearby woman what they're hoping to prevent. She shrugs. Illness, madness, death, whatever's coming next. Helpful. That's the thing. Medical science is just a rumour here. Most people don't trust it, and those who practice it are often doing it with one foot in astrology and the other in superstition. The moon's position, the alignment of planets, the date of your birth, all these things are considered relevant to whether your spleen is misbehaving. If you get sick during a bad moon, well, that's just your fate. Some villagers rely entirely on spiritual healers or cunning folk, part herbalist, part therapist, part neighbourhood wizard. You visited a physician yesterday, but today someone recommends you see Marjorie, who talks to bees and knows about stomach demons. Honestly, at this point, why not? So you make your way to the edge of the woods, where Marjorie lives in a cottage that seems built entirely from moss, animal bones, and good intentions. She greets you with a knowing look and immediately starts mumbling about the cold bile in your stomach. Then she waves a bundle of dried lavender over your head and spits on the ground. Standard procedure, apparently. She offers you a tea made of something she calls windroot, which tastes like boiled leather and old carrots. It makes your ears ring. She tells you to drink it 3 times a day until the bad spirits pass through your shadow. You nod like that means something. Then you pay her with a chicken feather and a broken comb. She seems thrilled. There's a quirky little fact buried in all this chaos. Medieval people didn't separate science and religion the way we do. Medicine, astrology, herbalism, and theology all lived together in one confusing soup of maybe this works. Monks copied medical texts filled with prayers and herbal remedies. Astrologers cast charts to help plan surgeries. Physicians might quote Hippocrates and the Book of Revelation in the same breath. The line between divine punishment and bad meat was blurry at best. Some scholars today debate how much of this was desperate survival versus genuine belief. Did people really think God gave them stomach cramps for not going to church? Or was that just the best explanation they had? There's evidence that many communities developed practical workarounds. They knew which herbs soothed fever, which poultices drew out infection. But without microscopes or germ theory, everything still had to be filtered through metaphor and magic. Disease wasn't just sickness, it was meaningful, it said something about you. As the sun climbs higher, the penitents leave the village, trailing a cloud of dust, smoke and dried blood. You're left with a headache, a slightly damp nosegay, and a growing suspicion that spiritual healing might not be your cure-all. You feel no better physically, but you do feel something else creeping in, an understanding. People don't believe these things because they're stupid. They believe them because they have to. In a world where sickness is everywhere and medicine is unreliable, belief is one of the few things that gives people a sense of control. Later you wander back to the village square and find a small group of people gathered around a man holding a chart of the stars. He claims to be able to diagnose illness based on someone's zodiacal imbalance. He asks for your birth date. You give it, reluctantly. He studies his parchment and tells you your liver is under the influence of Saturn, and that you should avoid wet foods for 7 days. You thank him, and quietly vow never to tell your actual doctor about this. As evening settles in, a parish priest holds a small service by the church. He prays for healing, for mercy, and for the protection of the village. He sprinkles holy water into the wind. The droplets drift toward you and catch the fading light like tiny stars. For a moment you forget about the filth and the fleas and the sour ale burbling in your gut. For a moment it's almost beautiful. Then someone coughs behind you, a deep, hacking cough. You flinch instinctively. Right, still medieval, still filthy, still sick. But hey, at least your humours are balanced now, right? You start the day the same way you seem to start every day now, scratching something that definitely shouldn't itch, and wondering if your soul has finally left your body during the night to avoid any further trauma. Your breath smells like a mix of onions and spiritual failure. Your tunic is developing its own texture ecosystem, and the bite on your ankle is either healed or evolved. Hard to say. You've become disturbingly accustomed to the stink of your own body and the smell of other people's, which isn't so much an odour anymore as it is a constant invisible fog that gently slaps you every time you inhale. But today you're staying indoors, which sounds cosy until you realise it's not. You're inside a medieval house which is, let's be honest, basically a glorified smoke trap. The cottage is small, with low ceilings and a single window the size of a paperback book. Light doesn't so much enter the room, as it timidly peeks in and immediately regrets it. The air inside is thick with smoke from the hearth, which burns almost constantly in the centre of the single shared room, providing both heat and something to cough about. You sit by the fire, hoping for warmth but getting eye irritation instead. There's no chimney, just a hole in the thatched roof that only sort of works. The smoke hovers at ceiling level, then gradually sinks as the room fills up with bodies. By mid-morning your eyes are watering, your throat burns, and your lungs feel like they've been sandpapered. You're coughing now, joining the chorus. Here's the thing, houses like this weren't just smoky, they were deadly. Open hearths were common in medieval homes, especially among the poor. They cooked over them, heated water over them, and slept beside them. But ventilation, that's a luxury. Many cottages didn't have proper chimneys until much later in the Middle Ages, so the smoke, along with all the delightful particles of ash, charred food and burning dung, just hung around. Inhaling it was unavoidable. Let's talk materials. The roof is thatch, dried straw and reeds packed thick over wooden beams. Great for insulation, also great for catching fire with zero warning. You glance upward every so often, half expecting to see flames licking down through the ceiling. Everyone acts like this is fine. It's not. Thatch fires are terrifyingly common. One errant spark and the whole village could be a pile of warm ashes and soot-stained regrets. The walls are made of wattle and daub, a charming phrase that basically means woven sticks smeared with a paste of clay, mud, and sometimes animal dung. It smells as good as it sounds. It's drafty, crumbly, and prone to moulding if the weather gets damp. Spoiler, the weather is damp. Everything in this house is moist and slightly spongy, including the floor, which is, ready for it? Dirt. Just dirt. Packed earth that turns to mud when it rains and kicks up dust when it doesn't. There's no insulation, no running water, no soundproofing, and definitely no privacy. Everyone shares the same space. Parents, children, grandparents, the family pig. You're trying to eat a piece of hard bread while a toddler picks something from your hair, and the pig snuffles loudly near your feet, rooting through what you suspect is a pile of yesterday's dinner that fell and just stayed there. Your new friends are surprisingly cheerful, though. They're used to this. They've never had anything else. The fire warms their hands, and they tell stories while spinning wool or mending clothes. You're learning to sit very still so you don't disturb the swarm of fleas orbiting around you like a tiny, horrible solar system. The moment you move, they'll settle. You now scratch rhythmically, without thinking. Time for a fringe fact to brighten your soot-caked day. In some parts of Europe, people hung dried weasel skins from the rafters to keep away illness. Why? Because it was believed the weasel had mystical powers of purification and protection. And you know what? At this point, you'd wear a whole weasel suit if someone told you it would keep your lungs from turning into medieval jerky. Meanwhile, the smoke from the hearth has turned the entire interior of the cottage a shade of brownish grey. The wooden beams are blackened, the walls streaked with soot. Even your eyelashes feel dusty. It's like you've spent the day inside a barbecue pit run by someone with zero regard for ventilation codes. And let's not forget the smell of cooking. Today it's some kind of root stew with a suspicious whiff of turnip and old sock. You try to eat, but the texture is gluey and the flavour tastes like depression. Now let's sprinkle in some debate for our bedtime thought spiral. Historians argue about whether medieval people were completely oblivious to indoor air quality, or if they just didn't have options. Some evidence suggests wealthier homes and monasteries eventually developed basic chimney systems, and certain building styles included better airflow. But for the average peasant, you get a hole in the roof and a prayer. And speaking of prayers, someone in the room sneezes. Loudly. You freeze. A few people murmur something about spirits and glance toward the window, just in case one tried to slip in. In some regions, sneezing was seen as a sign the soul might escape, so naturally you bless the sneezer, or you glare and assume they're already half dead, depends on the region. Eventually the daylight fades, one oil lamp flickers in the corner. You're invited to sleep where you sit once again, pressed between a wall that smells like damp cheese, and someone's uncle who breathes with a raspy wheeze that suggests lung disease is about to make a guest appearance. You close your eyes, exhale smoke, and wonder how many years this place is shaving off your life. Your modern lungs are crying, your back aches from the damp air, your nostrils are coated with soot. You've got more bacteria on you than a lab petri dish, and yet somehow everyone else is snoring peacefully, completely unbothered. Just as you're drifting off, a spark pops from the fire. You jolt awake, eyeing the thatched roof. It's still there. For now. You close your eyes again. Now let's hope it still is in the morning. You wake to a sound that's becoming disturbingly normal. The slosh of something wet being dumped into the street just outside your door. It's either slop from last night's stew or someone's chamber pot. Honestly, who can tell anymore? The smell drifts in immediately, wrapping itself around your nose like an old rag soaked in sadness. You sit up slowly, coughing, your back stiff from sleeping on straw and whatever lumpy object was beneath your spine all night. A rock, a root, a forgotten turnip, doesn't matter. The ache is permanent now. It lives in you. Today you're venturing into town. You've seen the edge of it before, smelled the meat stalls, heard the barking dogs and shouting vendors, but now you're going deeper. The heart of the medieval town. The centre of trade, life, gossip, and, most importantly, garbage. From a distance, the town almost looks charming. Cobbled streets, buildings leaning together like old friends whispering secrets, and shop signs swinging lazily in the breeze. But once you're in it, the charm peels away like damp wallpaper. The streets are narrow, choked with people, and every step is a gamble. You learn quickly not to look too closely at what your boots are squishing into. Everything is layered in grime. The streets themselves are a mixture of mud, animal droppings, food waste and, let's be honest, bodily fluids. Pigs trot casually between people's legs, sniffing for scraps. They're not pets. They're walking trash compactors. If someone keels over and dies in the street, give it an hour and a pig will be there doing clean-up duty. There's no organised waste disposal. Sure, some towns have rules about keeping the streets tidy, but these are more like gentle suggestions than enforceable laws. And even if someone does try to clean up, where would they put it? The entire town is built on centuries of its own waste. There's no sanitation department, no garbage trucks, just piles of refuse that are trampled flat or shovelled into the nearest ditch, where it stays until the next flood or rat colony decides to relocate it. And here's where things get really lovely. Over time, entire cities have literally risen in elevation because of the build-up of waste and debris. In London, for example, archaeologists have found layers of packed earth and trash that push street levels higher with each generation. Buildings had to add extra steps down into their doors because the roads outside kept getting taller. Imagine living in a house where the floor slowly sinks year after year. Not from settling, but because people keep throwing their garbage in the street until it becomes the street. You pass a tannery and suddenly your nose folds in on itself like it's trying to flee your face. The smell is indescribable. It's like rotting meat left in a damp basement, mixed with urine and the quiet weeping of lost innocence. That's because tanning leather requires soaking animal hides in a mix of water, dung, and, you guessed it, human urine. Workers stomp on the skins in vats of this vile stew, then hang them to dry in the open air, which means the surrounding neighbourhood lives in a permanent cloud of misery. You consider running, but your legs are too tired, so you just keep moving, eyes stinging, praying for wind. Here's your quirky fringe fact for today. There were entire professions based around collecting urine. Yes, really. It was considered a valuable resource, used not just in tanning, but also in fulling, a kind of cloth-making process, and even for cleaning. Some people were paid to gather it from chamber pots and cesspits. If you're wondering how bad your job is, just remember there were people whose daily duty was to walk around with buckets of pee. They were called piss collectors. Sleep on that. And speaking of cesspits, you pass an alley where the ground suddenly dips and reveals a sunken area lined with wooden boards. It's an old latrine pit. It reeks, of course, and it's not exactly closed off. You imagine falling into that and understand deep in your soul why some people in this era never recovered from their trauma. The only thing worse than living above a cesspit is falling into one. This is what makes town life so dangerous. Disease spreads like gossip here. Close quarters, poor hygiene, constant filth. If someone coughs in the marketplace, everyone within 10 feet probably catches whatever they have. Food is sold out in the open, swarmed by flies. Butchers hack meat on blood-soaked boards and then wipe their hands on their aprons before offering you a fresh cut. And there's no refrigeration, remember, so that meat may be days, even weeks old. Spiced and salted, yes. Still questionable? Absolutely. There's a scholarly debate here, of course. Some historians argue that medieval towns were more regulated than we give them credit for, that market inspectors existed, that guilds maintained cleanliness standards for their trades, and that public health ordinances were common in cities like Paris and Venice. And while some of that is true, enforcement was uneven, to put it kindly. It's like saying there's a speed limit, but no one has a car, and the only traffic cop is a guy with a wooden stick and a strong opinion. The town square is full now. Hawkers shout, dogs bark, children chase each other barefoot through puddles that are definitely not rainwater. A rat scurries across a stall, and no one reacts. It's just Tuesday. You stop at a baker's stand and are offered a piece of bread. You bite into it and immediately feel grit between your teeth. That's from the millstone, tiny bits of stone that grind off into the flour. Over time, people's teeth were worn down to nubs from eating bread laced with what is, effectively, sand. You chew carefully, as if you're eating a delicious slice of erosion. A few stalls down, someone is selling fresh water. You look at the barrels, they're green, you pass. By the end of the day, your boots are coated in unidentifiable slime. Your nose has gone numb, and you've started to understand that medieval towns weren't just dirty. They were built on a foundation of filth, both literal and metaphorical. You're walking on centuries of it, breathing it, eating it, and yet, people survive here. They trade, sing, gossip, flirt. Life happens, even with rats underfoot and the constant risk of stepping into something you'll regret forever. It's disgusting, it's dangerous, and somehow it's still home for them. You wake up thinking, just for a second, that maybe you've adapted. That maybe, just maybe, your senses have dulled enough to make medieval life tolerable. But then a nobleman rides past the cottage on his very expensive, very well-fed horse, and the sheer wave of perfume and rotting velvet he leaves in his wake nearly knocks you off your feet. It hits you like a brick of incense and body odour. Rich people, it turns out, don't smell better than peasants. They just smell different. You stumble back, eyes watering, caught somewhere between gagging and admiration. Because even through the stench you can tell, this guy has money. His boots are real leather, his tunic is embroidered, and the cloth looks imported, probably from somewhere you can't even pronounce. He's dripping in status, and also possibly something that should have been washed off weeks ago. Here's the deal. Medieval nobility did not smell like roses. They smelled like old roses, decaying roses, roses buried under 50 pounds of unwashed brocade. If you were expecting lords and ladies to waft about in lavender-scented elegance, I'm sorry to disappoint you. The rich were just as filthy as everyone else, sometimes more so, because they had more fabric to hide it under. Bathing among the elite was complicated. Some nobles did bathe occasionally, especially early in the Middle Ages, when bathhouses and Roman traditions still lingered. But over time, thanks to shifting medical beliefs and religious paranoia, washing your whole body became increasingly frowned upon. The church started associating frequent bathing with vanity and temptation. If your body was too clean, who knows what kind of sinful thoughts might follow? So instead of washing, nobles covered their stench with layers of perfume, spices and dried flowers tucked into little pouches. Think of it as medieval Febreze, but less effective and far more pungent. The result? A noble might wear silk embroidered with gold thread, but underneath it all they're marinating in months-old sweat and the aroma of expensive decay. And that clothing? Oh boy, nobles wore a lot of it. Rich fabrics like velvet, brocade and fur weren't just status symbols, they were layers of microbial party zones. Heavy, unbreathable and rarely cleaned, noble garments would absorb sweat and hold it hostage. In winter, nobles might wear the same fur-lined outfit for weeks, sweating and feasting in it daily. The inside of those robes? Probably enough to take down a small bear. You watch from the side of the road as the nobleman dismounts, his servants scrambling around him, brushing dust off his sleeves, adjusting his hat, and shooing away peasants who've strayed too close. One boy gets too near and is immediately cuffed by a guard. You step back instinctively, realizing something else. Class stench is political. The poor smell because they work, the rich smell because they don't, and no one dares tell them they reek. And here's a weird fringe fact to flavour your thoughts. Some medieval physicians believed that noble bodies were different, more refined, more delicate, and in need of special treatment. This included gentler medicines, specialised diets, and yes, different hygiene advice. Nobles were told not to bathe too often because their skin was too sensitive, which is hilarious, considering that same skin was probably crawling with fleas under all that fur. That's right. Fleas, lice and other vermin didn't discriminate by class. Rich people had them too. They were just more in denial about it. In fact, wealthy folk sometimes owned grooming combs made of ivory or silver, ornately carved and kept in decorative cases. Not that they were used much. Mostly they were for display. Hygiene as aesthetic, not practice. You walk behind a group of nobles as they head toward the town's main hall for some sort of gathering. The closer you get, the more it becomes apparent. Everyone is faking it. Silken gloves cover dirty hands. Gold rings rest on fingers with grime under the nails. The noble lady ahead of you has pearls woven into her braided hair, and a visible patch of scalp crusted with something you choose not to identify. There's debate among historians about how often nobles really bathed. Some records show that queens and kings did have bathing routines, especially if they had access to private tubs and servants to haul the hot water. There are even mentions of scented oils and rosewater baths. But again, occasional luxury baths aren't the same as regular hygiene. A few ceremonial scrubs a year don't offset months of sweating in full court attire. One notable example is Queen Isabella of Castile, who famously bathed only twice in her entire life, once at birth and once on her wedding night. Whether that's fact or exaggeration, it captures the cultural attitude perfectly. Bathing was considered dangerous, decadent, or simply unnecessary. And deodorant? Not a thing. The most people had was a sprig of herbs stuffed in their sleeve. You've seen people in this town reek less while butchering pigs. You duck into the edge of the hall trying to go unnoticed. Inside it's hot and dim, packed with bodies. The windows are few, the air stagnant. Candles drip wax onto stone floors. Everyone is standing close together, chatting, laughing, occasionally hacking up a lung. The air is heavy with sweat, perfume and roasted meat. You can taste it. A servant shuffles past with a tray of wine, and you snag a cup just to give your nose something else to focus on. Across the room, two noblemen are arguing over land. One slams his fist on a table, and something flies out of his mouth. It lands on a roast duck. No one notices. You glance around and try to imagine life in these clothes, at this level of wealth, in a world where hygiene is ritual and smell is status. The poor stink because they labour. The rich stink because they don't have to care, and all of them, regardless of station, are slowly being dissolved by their own skin oils. As you step back into the open air, if you can call it that, You finally understand why so many medieval buildings had those heavy tapestries and thick wall hangings. Not just to keep out the cold, but maybe, just maybe, to trap the smell inside. You walk away, downwind from the nobles, wondering if anyone in this entire kingdom has ever smelled clean for more than 15 minutes. So far, the answer is a resounding no. By now, your nose has become a hardened veteran, scarred, unflinching, immune to the daily horrors of medieval stench. Or so you thought. Because today, you're taking a walk through town with your host, and what you stumble into isn't just another bad smell, it's every bad smell all at once, layered into something so profoundly offensive that your brain tries to shut down as a defense mechanism. It hits you like a wall, sharp, sour, meaty and metallic all at once. 1 second, you're discussing wool prices with a very kind woman who may or may not have a pet rat in her sleeve, and the next, you're gagging into your own tunic. Your host just keeps walking, totally unfazed. She gestures casually toward the source like it's no big deal. Butcher's row, she says. Gets busy this time of day. Ah, butchers. That explains the puddles, and the flies, and the blood pooling in the grooves of the street like it's trying to draw a pentagram in meat juice. You step carefully, lifting your robe to avoid soaking the hem, but there's really no way to avoid it. The entire area is a slick mess of animal parts, discarded bones, and guts left to rot in the open air. You see a dog tugging at a raw sheep head. It wins. You look away. The stalls are lined with carcasses, some freshly slaughtered, some definitely not. They hang from hooks, their eyes glassy and unblinking. Flies form dense black clouds over the meat, occasionally dispersing with a lazy buzz only to regroup seconds later. The butchers themselves are shirtless, covered in dried blood from chest to boot, hacking away at cuts of meat with cleavers that look like they've never been cleaned. The smell, beyond anything you've experienced. It's sweet and sour in the worst possible way, like someone spilled vinegar on a sun-baked corpse. And here's the kicker. This is just part of everyday life. Butchers often worked right out in the open, using tables covered in dried gore without running water or refrigeration. Waste was dumped straight into the street or nearby ditches. It wasn't just unsanitary, it was actively hazardous. And if the butcher happened to be too close to the baker, congratulations. The smell of rotting meat just got baked into your bread crust. Your stomach turns as you pass a table where a man is skinning a pig with all the finesse of a drunk sculptor. A pile of entrails sits next to him, steaming slightly in the afternoon sun. He notices you staring and winks. You gag. He offers you a free bone. You run. You duck into a nearby alley for air. Your first mistake, because the alley is worse. This is where all the runoff from the butcher's flows. You see a child poking something with a stick. You do not look closer. A rat scurries out from under a barrel, dragging what looks suspiciously like a kidney. Your mouth goes dry. You vow to never eat again. And just when you think it can't possibly get more disgusting, you pass the tanner's yard. Oh, you've heard about tanning before. People warned you, but you weren't ready. No one is. Tanning animal hides requires soaking them in a solution of urine and animal brains. Yes, brains. The enzymes help soften the leather. After the soak, the hides are stretched, scraped and left to dry, often in the open, often near homes. The smell of tanneries is so horrific many towns actually banish them to the outskirts, but in smaller villages they're right there in the mix, and now so are you. It smells like a dead thing inside a dead thing, like every bad decision you've ever made was bottled and spilled across your path. Your eyes water involuntarily. You start to wheeze. You consider walking directly into a fire just to smell anything else. Let's take a brief moment to hit you with your fringe fact of the day. During medieval battles, the stench of blood, sweat and unwashed bodies was so intense that some soldiers would gag inside their helmets. Chroniclers described it as the smell of death, not because people died, though they definitely did, but because everything reeked of rotting wounds, open bowels and scorched flesh. Glamorous, right? There's actually scholarly debate over just how normal this level of filth was. Some historians argue that we're exaggerating the stench, projecting modern sensibilities onto a time that simply had a different tolerance threshold. Others say, no, it really was that bad, and contemporary complaints about foul airs and deathly mists weren't poetic. They were literal cries for help. Regardless, your nose doesn't care about academic nuance. It's had enough. You breathe through your mouth now, which is a mistake of equal magnitude, because now you can taste the air. It's thick, greasy, and vaguely metallic, like biting into a coin that's been left in soup. You try to focus on something else, anything else. A nearby apothecary is selling little bags of dried herbs and flower petals, meant to be worn around the neck. You buy one immediately and press it to your face. It helps, slightly. But the smell is still there, sneaking around the edges, whispering to your subconscious like a ghost made of rotting cow liver. The worst part? People are eating through all of this. Standing at stalls, munching on pies, slurping soup, licking grease from their fingers as if the air around them isn't a giant sneeze made of death and expired lamb. They laugh, they haggle, they gossip about their neighbours. You see a man drop a bit of cheese, pick it up from a puddle, wipe it on his sleeve and pop it into his mouth. You clutch your stomach and walk away. By the time you make it back to the cottage, your nose has been broken in like a pair of boots dipped in sewage. You collapse onto your straw bed, reeking of blood, smoke and existential dread. You no longer remember what fresh air smells like. Was it ever real? Did it ever exist? You close your eyes and wonder if your modern immune system is still alive or just lying in a fetal position somewhere in your gut screaming. Tomorrow you decide you're staying far from the market. Maybe you'll visit a farm instead. How bad could the animals be? You wake up not because you're well rested, but because a chicken is standing on your chest, casually pecking at a lice bite near your collarbone. You wave it off weakly and sit up, slowly, carefully, like someone who's just aged 30 years overnight. Your skin is itchy, your joints creak, and you smell like cured meat left in the sun. You've lost the ability to feel shame or hope. Today's plan is simple. Escape the town, even briefly. Your host has offered to take you to the nearby farm, probably because you look like you're about one festering wound away from a complete mental break. The air is better there, she says, which sounds promising. She doesn't mention the animals. You find out about them on arrival, and you learn very quickly the animals are not better. The moment you arrive, the first thing you see is a large pig rooting through what appears to be a pile of manure mixed with kitchen scraps. A few chickens peck nearby, utterly unbothered. A goat is tied to a post, chewing something that may have once been fabric. You step over a puddle of something very wet and very wrong. Then you step into another one, and another. You're 5 feet into the farmyard and already ankle deep in medieval soup. Your host proudly points out the various animals. Pigs, goats, chickens, geese, a cow, and even a few scraggly sheep that look like they're one bad day away from just lying down and giving up. They keep us alive, she says. You nod. That's the paradox, isn't it? These animals provide milk, meat, eggs, wool, and leather. They are vital, and they are also walking disease bombs with zero personal boundaries. There are no fences, no neat rows of pens. The animals go where they please, through the house, into the kitchen, and sometimes directly onto the sleeping mats. Pigs root under the table. Chickens lay eggs in laundry baskets. One goat, apparently named Gregory, climbs onto the roof when he's bored. You watch him chew the corner of the thatch like it owes him money. And here's where things get real. Animals aren't just part of farm life. They are part of human life, completely intertwined. People share their homes with them, not just because of necessity, but because there's no real concept of separating livestock from domestic space. A pig in the kitchen isn't weird. A pig not in the kitchen is. Especially in winter, when warmth matters more than hygiene, animals are brought inside to help heat the home. You're not sharing space with your dog, you're sharing space with a squealing, muddy furnace that occasionally poops near the hearth. This living arrangement comes with certain drawbacks. For one, parasites. You thought you were crawling with bugs? The animals are worse. Fleas, lice, ticks, all hopping freely between beast and human like a medieval swap meet. If you're sitting by the fire and the family dog leans against you, congratulations. You now have medieval Lyme disease, probably. Let's pause for a lovely fringe fact. Pigs were known to eat everything, and I mean everything. Kitchen scraps, human waste, rotting meat, dead animals, occasionally dead people. There are records, gruesome, unpleasant records, of pigs eating unattended infants or feasting on corpses after battles. They were efficient, yes. Sanitary, not even a little. So that adorable pig rooting near your boots, he's not your friend. He's your clean-up crew, and possibly your undertaker. You wander toward the cow pen, hoping for something more. Wholesome. It's not better. The smell is sharp and acrid, a mix of urine and hay that's gone to the dark side. The cows look healthy enough, but you learn quickly that milking isn't a peaceful pastoral affair. It's hard, messy, and done with hands that were, 5 minutes earlier, elbow deep in goat dung. Hygiene during milking? Non-existent. You watch someone squirt a stream of milk into a wooden pail with a crust on the rim that makes you want to cry. And here comes the kicker. Milk goes bad fast. No refrigeration, remember? So people drink it warm, sour, or turned into something approximating cheese. And that cheese? It's not your creamy brie or sharp cheddar, it's more like rubber that's given up. Chewing it is an emotional experience, one that requires faith. You move on to the chicken coop, which is just a loose circle of sticks and desperation. The hens are scrawny, the rooster is angry, and the eggs, well, you're not even sure they're eggs. They're small, misshapen, and suspiciously warm. Your host proudly hands you one. You nod, smile, and quietly pass it to a nearby child when she's not looking. The ground squelches beneath your boots as you walk, every step releasing a new wave of aromas. Wet feathers, pig breath, damp fur, old blood, and the distant whiff of something decomposing. You can't tell if it's an animal, a food pile, or a relative they forgot to bury. You try not to look. Let's dive into the scholarly debate here. Some historians argue that the close relationship between animals and humans created stronger communities and better survival odds. After all, the animals provided warmth, food, labour, and even companionship. But others point out that these living arrangements also led to zoonotic disease transmission, plagues that jumped from animal to human, thanks to fleas, rats, and viruses we couldn't even name at the time. And yes, rats. You see them too, running along the beams of the barn, climbing into grain sacks. One even looks at you like you're the intruder. These rats are bold, muscular, and built like they lift heavy objects recreationally. You take a step back, so do the chickens. You finally sit near a trough, utterly defeated, covered in fur, feathers, and flecks of something sticky. Your boots are ruined, your soul is fragile. A goat approaches and gently but firmly tries to eat the hem of your robe. You let him, you don't have the energy to resist. The sun begins to set, casting a warm glow over the chaos. You realise that for all the squalor, this farm is someone's pride and joy. It's how they live, how they survive, and in a strange, scratchy way, it works. There's food on the table, wool for clothing, meat for winter. The pigs may be walking nightmares, but they're essential. The goat may be a menace, but he's also milk. As you walk back to the cottage, still smelling like barnyard and broken dreams, you look up at the sky. It's beautiful, open, endless. For a moment, the filth feels smaller. Then you step in something squishy, warm. You don't ask, you don't look, you just keep walking. By now you've reached a level of filth that transcends the physical. It's spiritual, existential. You no longer measure time in days, but in layers of grime. Your skin itches constantly. Your clothes smell like a plague pit after a thunderstorm, and you've made peace with the idea that you're 47% bug at this point. But there's still one layer of medieval life you haven't explored. One dark, forbidden layer. Toilet paper, or more precisely, the complete and utter lack thereof. It happens mid-afternoon, after you've finally managed to choke down a bowl of cabbage stew so fermented it might qualify as a war crime. About an hour later, your body sends a firm, unmistakable message. It's time. You clench everything and frantically ask your host for directions. She smiles, nods toward a path behind the cottage, and hands you a bundle of hay. Hay, you thank her. You take the hay. You walk. The latrine is a glorified trench behind a shed, shielded from view by a loose curtain of burlap and hope. You step inside, careful not to slip on the muddy slope leading into the pit. Flies buzz in a lazy, ominous cloud. The smell is exactly what you'd expect from a hole used by half a dozen people a day and cleaned never. You crouch, balancing like a nervous deer on the edge of a cliff, and stare down at the bundle of hay in your hands like it might save your soul. This is your toilet paper. Let's walk through your options. If you're rich, really rich, you might have access to linen rags, or even wool scraps, but these are expensive and not exactly single-use. They're washed and reused, which makes you want to scream into the abyss. For most people, however, wiping is a choose-your-own-adventure experience involving hay, moss, straw, handfuls of grass, or even seashells. Yes, seashells. Smooth ones, preferably. The rough ones are for your enemies. You give the hay a skeptical poke. It's dry, brittle, full of sharp little edges. It's like wiping with angry nature. You do your best, but there's no dignity here. No softness. No aloe-infused triple-ply comfort. Just regret. Lots of it. And here's a historical fact that'll really make your skin crawl. In some monasteries, monks shared communal toilet rags on sticks. Called tossoriums by the Romans, these sticks were sometimes soaked in vinegar and reused again and again by a whole line of people. This horrifying baton of communal hygiene eventually made its way into certain religious communities, where the idea of personal comfort took a distant backseat to humility. Imagine trying to meditate on the divine while also wondering if Brother Thomas gave you pink eye. You finish your grim business, pull up your layers of increasingly damp and tragic clothing, and shuffle back to the cottage in silent horror. The hay has done its best. It has failed. You have failed. The entire system has failed. Later, trying to recover, you ask your host how often the latrine is cleaned. She shrugs. When it fills. You don't ask what happens then. You don't want to know. Instead, you decide to change the subject. What do people use in the city, you ask? She laughs. Whatever they can find. In towns and cities, the situation is even worse. Public latrines are rare, and when they do exist, they're often overflowing. Some wealthier homes have private guardrobes, basically wooden chutes that lead to cesspits. But the problem is what happens to those cesspits. They fill, fast, and someone has to empty them. Enter the gong farmer. Yes, that was a real job. Gong farmers were the poor souls hired to climb down into cesspits and shovel out human waste by hand, usually at night. They were paid relatively well, considering the horror involved, but the social stigma was brutal. These men often lived on the fringes of society, because no one wanted to stand downwind of them. Your quirky fact for today. Some gong farmers used long poles with baskets at the end to scoop out the waste without going fully inside the pit. This sounds like a clever workaround until you remember that in many cases they still had to go in anyway, and sometimes they fell in. And yes, people died that way. You wonder what those funerals were like. Probably short. There's a scholarly debate about just how widespread the use of natural materials for wiping really was. Some records suggest that in certain regions, smooth river stones were used. In other places, wool rags were standard. But everyone agrees on one thing: there was no standard. Your wiping experience depended entirely on geography, class, the season, and your ability to find something vaguely absorbent. Some people just didn't wipe at all. You sit with that knowledge. You wish you hadn't. As night falls, your host lights a candle and hands you a cloth to wipe your hands. It's stiff, stained. You stare at it for a moment, then politely decline. You no longer trust fabric, or people, or anything. You curl up on your straw bed, itchy and haunted. Your soul feels bruised. You try to sleep, but the memory of wiping with hay lives in your brain like a gremlin now. You wonder, vaguely, if medieval poets ever wrote sonnets about toilet suffering. They must have. No one lives through this without needing to scream into a quill. Tomorrow you swear to yourself you'll avoid eating altogether. It's the only way, but deep down, you know you won't. You wake up with the realization that your body has started to betray you in new and exciting ways. Your skin is itchy in patches, but not from bugs this time. No, this feels fungal, a new frontier in medieval discomfort. You sit up slowly, scratching at your forearm, and notice your sleeve has stiffened. Not from drying out. No, it's fuzzy. There's a fine, grey-white dust growing in the fabric, like your clothes are trying to evolve into something else. Congratulations, your outfit is rotting. Clothing in the Middle Ages isn't exactly designed for long-term freshness. Most people own one, maybe two outfits at most. They wear the same garments every day, sleep in them, sweat in them, cry into them, wipe their hands and noses on them, and sometimes, let's be honest, die in them. You're now participating in this proud tradition, and your tunic is absorbing history by the hour. You peel it off, and the smell that escapes is less human and more fermented livestock. Your chemise, the linen underlayer that's supposed to protect your outer garments from sweat, has failed spectacularly. It clings to your skin like damp bread. You hang your clothes near the fire, hoping for some kind of miracle. What you get instead is the smell of scorched wool and mould baking together in the air, like a casserole no one asked for. Your host offers you a replacement tunic, an older one that belonged to her late husband. You nod gratefully, and she pulls it from a chest near the hearth. It's heavier than your last one, thick with years of wear, and looks like it's been patched with whatever fabric was available. A bit of sackcloth here, a chunk of curtain there, possibly part of an old flag. You slip it on, and it makes a sound like a damp towel being wrung out. It's warm though, smells like dust, old meat, and barn cat. You'll take it. The thing is, most medieval clothes were made from wool or linen. Natural fibres, yes, but ones that absorb everything. Sweat, rain, oil, mildew. There's no chemical detergent. Washing, when it happens, involves lye soap that's harsh enough to strip paint, a river, and lots of aggressive beating on rocks. Clothes get damaged fast, so people avoid washing them as much as possible. Your garments aren't so much clean as they are less disgusting than they were last week. And then there's the drying process. If you're lucky, the sun's out. If not, you dry your clothes by the fire on a rope or just by wearing them damp. All of which invite mould, which you're now wearing, on your back. You try not to think about it, but it's itchy, persistent, definitely alive. Here's your fun fringe fact for the day. Some people would rub rosemary or lavender into their clothes to fight the smell. Not wash them, just rub herbs on top. It's like using body spray instead of showering, but for pants. In fact, wealthy people sometimes stuffed sachets of dried flowers into their sleeves or collars. You've seen those little pouches dangling off people's belts. You assumed they were coin purses. Nope, just medieval Febreze. You spend the morning helping your host with the laundry, or rather watching her do laundry in a way that seems both brutal and profoundly inefficient. She hauls water from the stream, pours it into a wooden tub, adds homemade soap that smells like ashes and goat fat, then slams the clothes against a board. Over and over, it's less washing and more punishment. If the shirt survives, it's clean enough. If not, well, time to turn it into patches for someone else's mouldy tunic. There's a scholarly debate around how often people actually wash their clothes. Some historians argue that linen undergarments were washed fairly frequently, once every week or two, which, in this world, qualifies as high hygiene. Outerwear? Maybe once a season, if that. And wool was rarely washed at all. Wet wool is heavy, takes days to dry, and smells like a sheep's afterlife. So instead, people just lived in it, marinated in it. Let the layers cake and crust and season like an old skillet. Your shoes aren't doing any better. Made of soft leather, they've absorbed every step you've taken, through mud, offal, sewage, puddles of mysterious origin. The leather has stretched, warped, and thinned. They squish now when you walk, not from water, but from what feels like internal rot. You take them off, and the smell makes a nearby chicken sneeze. There's also the issue of what's inside your shoes. You've picked up something fungal, possibly several somethings. You have a small colony thriving between two toes. Your socks, if you can call them that, are strips of wool wrapped around your feet and held in place with string. They've turned a shade of greenish grey that can't possibly be normal. You toss them into the fire, they hiss. A young boy in the household is wearing the same tunic he's been wearing all week. He's wiped his nose on it so many times the sleeves are stiff. His knees poke out of holes in the fabric, and a patch on the back is clearly made from what was once a curtain. He beams at you. "Look," he says proudly, "Mama says I can wear this to the feast next week." You nod, trying not to cry, and yet somehow people treat these clothes as prized possessions. Because they are. A good tunic can take days or even weeks to make, especially if it's woven and sewn by hand. Fabric is labour intensive, and thread isn't cheap. The idea of fast fashion doesn't exist here. If something rips, you patch it. If it wears through, you repurpose it. If it rots, well, maybe don't wear that one anymore. By nightfall, you've gone through 3 tunics. One mouldy, one scorched, and one that possibly gave you ringworm, and your skin is begging for fresh air. You lie down on the straw mat wearing nothing but your linen shift and a faint sense of shame. You no longer care about modesty. You only care about airflow. You scratch at your ankle absently. New rash, you name it. Jeff, tomorrow you promise yourself you'll wash everything somehow, even if you have to beat your clothes on a rock while sobbing into the river. But first, sleep. And if you dream, may it be of clean laundry flapping in the wind, under a sun that smells like citrus and detergent, and not like goat tallow and mildew. You wake up to bells ringing softly in the distance. Not alarm bells, not this time, but church bells, their echo floating through the fog like a hymn lost in sleep. You rub your eyes, still itchy from the smoke and mould, and follow the sound. Your host tells you today is a holy day. There will be prayers, offerings, maybe even a procession if the weather holds. She hands you a sprig of something fragrant, sage maybe, or thyme, and tells you to tuck it into your sleeve. For the smell, she says gently without judgment. You don't ask if she means your smell or the church's. Either way, fair enough. The village church stands on a small hill, its stone walls lopsided and weather-streaked, its wooden doors swollen from centuries of dampness. It's not grand, not ornate. There are no marble columns or glittering stained glass, but it's solid, and everyone gathers there, sometimes to worship, sometimes just to sit in silence and pretend for an hour that their knees aren't full of lice, and their bellies aren't full of turnip water. As you step inside, a wave of scent hits you. Not entirely unpleasant, but not entirely comforting either. It's thick, heady incense. Frankincense, myrrh, maybe something floral if someone's feeling ambitious. The smoke curls through the dim interior, clinging to the rafters and mingling with the other smells already baked into the space. Mildew, wet wool, and an undertone of very old wood that's absorbed too many centuries of breath and grief. The church is packed, bodies close together, shoulders brushing. The air is heavy with the perfume of unwashed humanity. Even in a sacred space, the smell follows. Some people hold small bouquets of herbs or wear wreaths of dried flowers around their necks. Others clutch rosaries, fingers stained and knuckles swollen. You sit near the back, between a woman who smells like vinegar and beeswax, and a man who may or may not have slept in the stables last night. Your nose twitches. You push the herb sprig closer to your face. The priest begins the service in Latin. You don't understand the words, but the rhythm is soothing. A slow chant that folds over itself like waves, occasionally interrupted by a cough or the creak of the pews. The candlelight flickers. Dust hangs in the air like golden mist. You begin to understand why people come here, not just for salvation, but for stillness. The church may smell like incense-covered poverty, but at least it doesn't smell like a latrine or a butcher's pit. Halfway through, the priest opens a reliquary at the front of the church and unveils the local holy treasure, the bone of a saint. Probably a finger, wrapped in silk and placed in a silver case that's seen better centuries. Everyone leans forward, reverent, eyes wide. You lean forward too, less for the holy moment and more out of morbid curiosity. The priest describes miracles associated with this particular relic: healing from fever, protection during childbirth, victory in a local sheep counting contest. You wonder what kind of resume you need to become a relic, and then you wonder what it must smell like under that silk. Probably not like a miracle. Here's your quirky fringe fact for the day. During the medieval period, many churches displayed the bones of saints and martyrs, but not all of them were, shall we say, verified. Some were actually the bones of random people, or even animals, passed off as holy. The faithful didn't question it. If the relic smelled strong enough and inspired enough awe, it was considered legitimate. You think about the foot bone you saw last week at the market being sold as a dragon claw, and suddenly everything makes a lot more sense. There's scholarly debate about how much medieval people genuinely believed in the power of relics. Some historians argue that it was a social tradition more than a spiritual one, a communal ritual to build identity and hope. Others insist the belief was very real. After all, when you live in a world of plagues, famines, and cursed meat pies, a finger bone in a silver box might be the most reliable protection you've got. The priest closes the reliquary, blesses the crowd, and begins walking through the congregation with a censer, swinging it gently. More smoke, more perfume. The air thickens until it feels like you're breathing through a wet curtain. You exhale slowly, trying not to cough. A woman kneels beside you, pressing her forehead to the cold stone floor, whispering something that might be a prayer or a list of debts. In this place, they're basically the same. You notice how no one reacts to the smell. They're used to it. They've lived their whole lives in a world where even the sacred stinks. The idea that a holy place should be clean, actually clean, is a luxury of modern thinking. Here, cleanliness is symbolic, spiritual. You may be covered in goat hair and have a mysterious fungal rash named Jeff spreading across your thigh. But if your soul is scrubbed clean, that's enough. But let's not ignore the irony. Churches were also notorious for being breeding grounds for disease. Crowded, poorly ventilated, full of coughing, sneezing, and incense smoke that irritated already inflamed lungs. Pilgrims arrived sick, slept on the floor, kissed relics with open sores, and left even sicker. In times of plague, people often gathered in churches to pray for deliverance, which, if you think about it, is like having a flu outbreak and deciding the best move is to host a full-capacity karaoke night. As the service ends, people begin filing out quietly. Some stop to touch the stone walls or leave coins at the foot of the altar. Others walk out weeping or whispering. You leave slowly, blinking as sunlight slaps your face outside. The church bells toll again, and you realise your clothes are now saturated with the scent of incense and candle smoke. It's not entirely unpleasant, certainly better than pig breath and rotten fish, but it clings to you just the same. You walk back down the hill with the rest of the congregation, the smell of sanctity trailing behind you. The village is quiet now, as if everyone's spirits have been reset for a moment. A baby cries, a dog barks, a man farts loudly and gets a laugh. You head home, sprig of thyme still in your sleeve, wondering if holiness can survive a place this filthy, or if maybe, just maybe, that's the point. You start the morning with a bowl of something that might be porridge or might be a regret, but you're too hungry to care. It's gritty, grey, and steaming in a way that makes you suspicious, but not enough to stop chewing. You're halfway through when you notice a strand of hair in it. Not yours, not anyone's you recognise, just a stray. You pluck it out, set it gently on the table, and keep eating. This is who you are now, but today, something's different. Your scalp itches with more urgency than usual. That familiar crawl, that maddening tickle, except now it's constant. You excuse yourself, wander behind the cottage, and begin the world's saddest grooming ritual. You part your hair with your fingers, feeling for the bumps and bites. You know what's there, you knew last week. But now it's worse. You're not just infested, you're housing them. You sit on a rock and begin pulling at your hair, section by section, until you catch sight of the telltale signs. Tiny white ovals clinging to strands like grains of rice. The lice have moved in, and they've brought friends. You find one and crush it between your nails. It makes that familiar sickening pop. You used to flinch. Now you barely blink. Your host finds you like this mid-squish and doesn't even ask questions. She hands you a wooden comb with teeth so fine they may as well be needles, and you get to work. It takes an hour, maybe more. You've stopped keeping time. You're just a person with a lice problem now, a walking buffet for insects. Hair in the Middle Ages is complicated. Clean hair is a rarity. Something aspirational, like living to 50, or not sharing a bed with a pig. People don't wash their hair often, and when they do, it's with cold water and harsh lye soap that makes your scalp feel like it's being punished. For most, grooming means combing out the worst of the knots and scratching until something gives. You've heard whispers of women rinsing with vinegar or herbal infusions, but those are luxuries, treats for feast days or weddings. Today's reality? You're sitting under a tree elbow deep in your own scalp, hoping to extract enough bugs to make the itching stop. You're not winning. Let's add some flair with a fringe fact. In certain noble households, lice picking was actually a bonding activity. A servant might sit behind their mistress, gently combing through her hair and casually crushing whatever they found. It was intimate, almost meditative. Some even claimed it was relaxing. You'd like to have a word with them, preferably while showing them what's currently crawling behind your ears. And you're not alone. Everyone's hair is alive. Children chase each other, scratching. Men casually pick at their beards. One woman near the well stops mid-conversation to pluck a flea from her temple and flick it away like it's lint. No one's ashamed, no one's shocked. Cleanliness is a battle no one's really winning. It's just a matter of who's losing slower. The hairstyles don't help. Peasant women braid their hair tightly and cover it with linen caps that trap heat and moisture. Men grow it long because scissors are expensive, and trimming means sitting still for a stranger with a sharp knife and no training. Nobles might style their hair into elaborate shapes, piling curls under pointed headdresses, but those headdresses don't breathe. They trap sweat, lice, and the occasional rodent. And let's not forget the beards, long, unwashed, filled with food crumbs and whatever was crawling across the pillow last night. Beards in this world aren't just a fashion statement, they're ecosystems. You avoid looking directly at them now. It's safer that way. There's some scholarly debate about how often people really groomed themselves in the Middle Ages. Some records suggest weekly combing and occasional hair washing was common, especially in monastic communities. Others argue that most grooming habits were focused on keeping vermin at bay, not aesthetics. Looking good was secondary to not hosting an insect family reunion on your scalp. You take a break from combing and look around. You see a woman kneeling near the field, dipping her comb in a pot of oil before pulling it through her daughter's hair. The oil helps trap lice, slows them down, makes them easier to crush. It's surprisingly effective, and you make a mental note to find some. Maybe that leftover goose fat by the hearth. You've hit rock bottom. You're open to options. There's a market stall that sells herbal remedies. You approach, eyes itching, and ask for something, anything, to help. The vendor offers a powder made from dried mint, ground rosemary, and finely crushed eggshells. You ask what the eggshells are for. She shrugs. Texture. You hand over a button and a half-rotten pear in trade. Back home, you mix the powder with a splash of water and scrub it into your scalp. It burns, not in a cleansing way, in a this might be poison way. But you're committed now. You sit by the fire, letting it dry into a crusty helmet of questionable medical value. The child next to you laughs. "You look like a pie," he says. You nod solemnly. "I feel like one." By evening the powder has done something. The lice are slower at least, or maybe just stunned. You comb again. The bugs fall into the flames one by one. You don't smile. You don't cheer. This isn't victory. It's maintenance. As you prepare for bed, you catch your reflection in a darkened window. Your hair is matted, streaked with ash and powder, tangled beyond saving. You haven't washed it in days, maybe weeks. It smells like meat smoke and herbal failure. You touch it gently, remembering shampoo, conditioner, hot water, that perfect post-shower softness. It feels like a different life. A fairy tale. You lie down, wrapping your hair in a cloth to trap whatever's still alive. You know they'll be back. Lice don't die easily. Neither do you, apparently. You close your eyes and whisper a prayer, not to the saints, not to the relics, but to the god of modern plumbing and drugstore conditioner. May their kingdom come. You wake up to the faint sound of water sloshing and voices murmuring just outside the cottage. For a moment your hazy mind leaps to something extravagant, something impossibly clean. Could it be? No, surely not. A bath. You stumble outside, hair still crunchy from last night's homemade lice crust, and find a group of villagers gathered near a small wooden building that smells suspiciously of mildew and wet feet. A curl of steam drifts lazily from a crooked chimney. Your host grins and gestures for you to come closer. "Bath day," she says. "If there's room, you can go." You blink. It feels surreal. A bath? Here? You glance at the building, small, half-collapsed, vaguely leaning to one side. It looks more like a tool shed than a spa, but you're in. You'd sell your soul and half your remaining dignity for a tub of hot water and a moment's peace. Inside, it's dark, steamy, and smells like smoke, soap, and skin. There are wooden tubs, maybe 3 of them, arranged in a cramped corner, each barely big enough for an adult to sit in with their knees pressed to their chin. The water in one is hot and already brownish. The other 2 are lukewarm at best, each holding a soup of strangers, floating hair, and hope. This is your first introduction to the medieval communal bath. You're not getting a tub to yourself. That's not how this works. You wait awkwardly, trying not to stare as people wash. Modesty exists, but it's looser here, practical. Some strip down fully, others keep on their shifts or wrap a cloth around their waist. No one seems embarrassed. It's just bathing. For most, it's the first chance in weeks to scrape off the topsoil of their lives. When your turn comes, you slip into a tub with 2 other people, a man who smells faintly of onions and boiled leather, and a teenage girl who doesn't make eye contact and keeps her elbows tucked in like she's trying to vanish. The water is tepid and already has a film across the top. You lower yourself in with a soft grunt, trying to ignore the feel of someone else's toe brushing yours. It's not a relaxing soak. There are no candles, no bath bombs, no essential oils unless you count the faint aroma of rosemary from someone's rinsing bucket. You're here to get clean. You're handed a rough cloth and a piece of yellowish soap that smells like ashes and boiled fat. It's gritty. When you scrub, it feels like exfoliating with sand. You lather your arms, your chest, your neck, hesitating at your scalp, still raw from the lice treatment. The soap stings and the water carries every scab and flake away in slow spirals. It's disgusting. It's glorious. You haven't felt this level of semi-clean since you arrived. Your skin, beneath the layers of grime and shame, actually exists. Your feet are pink again. Your nails no longer look like hooves. You even managed to scrape out some of the residue from your ears. It's satisfying in the way pulling off a scab is satisfying. Gross, but deeply necessary. And here's a quirky fact to liven up your scrubbing. In some bathhouses, especially in cities, people didn't just come to clean, they came to socialise. Bathhouses were a hub of gossip, matchmaking, and occasionally, let's say, extracurricular activities. Some had separate hours for men and women, while others didn't bother. In the early Middle Ages, it wasn't uncommon for monks and nuns to bathe together. Quietly, politely, completely normal. Later, of course, the church would crack down on such things, calling bathhouses dens of sin and disease. You look around the room now and can almost feel it, the ancient tension between hygiene and holiness. A woman mutters a prayer while scrubbing her elbows. A boy dunks his head like he's trying to baptize the lice out of his curls. There's laughter in one corner and silence in another. This is survival, not indulgence. A few scoops of warm water, a stolen moment of freshness, nothing more. There's a scholarly debate, as always. Some argue that medieval people did value cleanliness, more than we assume. Records show that bathhouses were widespread, especially in Islamic and Byzantine regions, and even in medieval Europe, towns often had at least one public bath. But they were also unpredictable. Fires, plagues, and moral panic closed them down frequently. And when the Black Death hit, many blamed bathing for opening the pores and inviting disease. Suddenly being clean became dangerous. But in villages like this one, bath day is more about practicality than fear. No one expects you to be spotless. They just want to remove the layer of crust that makes your tunic stand up on its own. People leave with flushed cheeks and damp hair, not perfumes and pampering. You're clean enough. That's the goal. You climb out of the tub, wrapping yourself in a length of cloth that smells better than you do. You feel light, almost floaty, like your body has been peeled and scrubbed down to its core settings. Your hair drips onto your shoulders. Your fingernails gleam faintly in the light. It's a rare and fleeting victory, and you savour every second. Of course, it doesn't last. Outside the bathhouse, the wind immediately smacks you with the smell of pigs and smoke. A child throws something at a goose, misses, and it splashes into a puddle that sprays across your calves. You're sweating within minutes under your layers of wool and linen, and you know, deep down, that the lice will be back by tomorrow. Still, for now, you're not sticky. You're not flaking. You're not leaving a trail of body grease behind you. You are, by medieval standards, practically glowing. You return to the cottage where your host sniffs you and smiles. You smell like a person again, she says. You laugh. It's the best compliment you've had in days. That night you go to bed freshly scrubbed, wrapped in cloth that isn't damp, with your hair loosely braided to keep the tangles out. You feel almost human, almost new. And then you hear scratching in the rafters. Rats, of course. But hey, at least you're clean, for now. The fresh-bathed feeling lasts less than a day. You tried. You really did. But by the next morning a suspicious itch has returned. The back of your tunic smells faintly of wet sheep again, and something crusty is already forming behind your left knee. Worse still, you wake to a scene that, while perfectly ordinary to the medieval mind, sends a cold wave of panic down your spine. A birth is happening, right there, in the cottage, on the same floor where you've been sleeping, on the same straw mat you're fairly certain you used last Tuesday. The woman, young, pale, sweating, lies groaning in the corner while another woman kneels beside her, sleeves rolled up, hands steady, face calm in the way someone gets when they've delivered 15 babies and buried 5. You press yourself against the far wall, wide-eyed. No hospitals, no sterile gowns, no monitors, no gloves, just rough cloth, boiling water in a cracked pot, and a pair of hands that know what to do by feel and hope. In the medieval world, birth isn't a moment of celebration. It's a gamble. It's messy, painful, and alarmingly casual. No one clears the room. No one lowers their voices. You hear a goat bleat in the doorway and no one shoos it away. Life begins in the same space as everything else. Cooking, sleeping, arguing, lice-picking. It's not sacred. It's just part of it. You see the midwife pull a small knife from her belt. You look away. The labouring woman screams, long and low. The air thickens with tension, sweat, and something more primal. Fear. You can feel it. Everyone can. Because childbirth is one of the most dangerous events in a woman's life here. No pain relief, no interventions. If something goes wrong, it's over. But it doesn't go wrong. Not this time. After what feels like hours, there's a wet sound, a cry, and the room collectively exhales. The midwife holds up a slippery, wailing baby and quickly gets to work. tying off the cord with string, wiping the child down with cloth, wrapping it in a swaddle that's definitely been used before. The mother's face is ghost pale, but she smiles weakly. Then she sleeps, instantly. The kind of sleep that only follows immense suffering. Here's your quirky fact. In many parts of medieval Europe, women gave birth in what were called birthing chairs, basically wooden thrones with holes in the seat, designed to help with gravity. These chairs were passed down through generations, sacred heirlooms of agony. In smaller villages like this one, they're rarer, and the floor is good enough. A straw mat, a sheet, and a few strong hands. What more could you ask for? You help gather clean rags, well, cleanish, while the midwife burns a bundle of dried herbs in the corner. The smoke coils through the room, a mix of mugwort and sage meant to purify the space and hide the smell of afterbirth, which has already started to seep into the floorboards. You resist the urge to run outside. You've smelled worse. You remind yourself of that. But this is different. This is life, raw and unfiltered, and it's louder than anything you've witnessed so far. Later, someone tells you the mother will be confined to her bed for at least a month. The lying-in period. During this time, she'll rest, be brought broth and soft bread, and avoid going outside. It's part superstition, part survival instinct. Her body is vulnerable, so is her spirit. No heavy lifting, no cold air, definitely no church. She's spiritually unclean, they say, until she's properly churched, a postnatal blessing that welcomes her back into the sacred fold. There's a debate among historians about whether this confinement was oppressive or restorative. Some argue it gave women a rare moment of communal care, time to bond with other women, to be pampered, to recover without expectation. Others point out that being labelled unclean for giving birth isn't exactly empowering. Either way, the result is the same. She rests, because not resting would kill her. You're still processing the birth when someone mentions a funeral in the next village. A child, just 2 years old, died of fever in the night. There's no crying, just a quiet nod. The proximity between birth and death here is casual, brutal, almost seamless. Babies arrive, babies die. Sometimes they don't even get names until a few days in, just in case. Later, as dusk falls, you walk past the small wooden cross behind the cottage. 3 names are carved into it, all children, all under the age of 5. You don't ask, you don't need to. The graveyard is next to the well. Chickens pick at the dirt. Life and death side by side in perfect, filthy harmony. Here's a fringe fact that'll sit with you for a while. Many women didn't name their newborns right away. Instead, they called them little one, or baby, or nothing at all. Not until they were sure it would survive the week, the month, the season. And when they did name them, they often chose names of saints, not out of piety but as protection, a divine insurance policy. You head back inside where the baby's already suckling quietly and the midwife is packing up her few tools. The blade, the string, the oil, a job well done. No applause, just a nod. She'll be back soon for another birth, or a miscarriage, or maybe just to check on someone's infected toe. You lie down in your corner of the room, body aching, head spinning. You've seen a life begin and heard about one ending, all within the same span of hours, in the same cramped space where you eat, sleep, scratch, and try to pretend you're still a person with boundaries. Tomorrow, you're told, someone else will give birth. Down the road, another cottage, another mat. You try to sleep. The baby cries. And for once, the sound doesn't bother you. It feels like survival. You wake in the pre-dawn grey, the cottage silent save for the soft, rhythmic breathing of the newborn curled in the crook of its mother's arm. She's snoring now, which somehow makes her seem more human, more indestructible. You lie there a moment longer, cocooned in that thin hush between night and day, trying not to think about the scratch on your ankle that's become worryingly oozy. You name the infection Harold, just to keep things light. Harold it is. You're growing quite the inner circle of biological terrors, but today isn't about birth, or Harold, or even your increasingly suspicious cough. Today, you're headed to a place few visitors dare venture, the medieval kitchen. Not the kind with granite counters and expensive knives in a magnetic strip. No, this one is smoky, sweaty, and probably alive in more ways than you're emotionally prepared for. Your host waves you toward the hearth, a large soot-caked opening in the wall where all meals are prepared, often simultaneously, and with no clear regard for flavour pairings or fire safety. There's no chimney, Just a hole in the roof and a thick column of smoke that lazily fills the upper half of the room. You blink against it, eyes watering immediately, and realise this isn't cooking. It's combat. The floor is dirt covered in straw and what looks like a thin frosting of flour, ashes and old vegetable bits. A pot hangs on an iron hook above the flames, bubbling with something that might be soup or might be stew or might be the cumulative contents of the week's misfortunes. You don't ask. You've learned better. And here's your first hard truth of the medieval kitchen. Everything smells the same. Burned onions, wet ash, salted meat, damp cabbage, a little mould for texture. The idea of flavour is less about delight and more about masking rot. If your stew doesn't make you cry when you smell it, did you even try? Your host dumps a handful of wilted greens into the pot. You think you recognise turnip leaves, maybe nettles, maybe something that's not food. For taste, she says cheerfully. You nod, suppressing a cough as the steam rises. Let's detour into some quirky history. In medieval times, spices were a status symbol. The rich used saffron, cloves, cinnamon, not because it made the food better, though it did, but because it screamed wealth. These were imported, expensive, and often locked in tiny chests like treasure. For everyone else, you were lucky to have salt. Pepper was practically mythical, so food was salted, smoked, pickled, or simply endured. You get handed a knife. It's dull, curved, and coated with something that might once have been butter. Your job is to slice dried bread. Really dried bread. The kind that could chip a tooth if thrown too enthusiastically. It's called trench bread, and it's not meant to be chewed so much as used, as a plate, a spoon, and then maybe eaten at the end if your teeth can still be trusted. You cut uneven chunks, lay them out, and watch as someone spoons ladles of stew onto them. The bread absorbs the broth slowly, softening into something vaguely edible. It's brilliant in a way. 0 dishes, maximum efficiency. Also horrifying. The part of your brain trained on hygiene and plating presentation is weeping. While you slice, a girl next to you plucks feathers from a limp chicken. She does it fast, without emotion. The bird flops limply in her lap. You want to ask when it died, but again, you've learned. Never ask when the meat died. It's always recent, and that's the best answer you're going to get. In the corner, a small child is stirring something in a pot with a wooden spoon longer than he is tall. It smells sweet, almost pleasant. You get hopeful. Porridge, you ask. The child grins. Fermented oat water. Your hope dies quietly. And here's the kicker. Everything in this kitchen is flammable. The straw floor, the hanging bundles of herbs drying above the fire, the grease-slicked logs stacked for kindling. It's like someone took a kindling pile and decided to make soup inside it. Kitchen fires were a constant threat. One rogue spark and your whole life could turn to smoke and charred onions. There are no extinguishers, no running water, no insurance. There's scholarly debate about how sophisticated medieval cooking actually was. Some argue it was crude, boil everything, salt it, pray. But others point to cookbooks from the later Middle Ages, especially in noble courts, with elaborate dishes and complex flavours. The poor had fewer options, of course, but they made do, developing clever ways to stretch food, repurpose scraps, and spice things up with wild herbs and fermented sauces. Ah, yes, fermentation, the medieval fallback for everything. If it smells bad now, just let it rot a little more and call it sauce. There's a clay jug by the hearth containing something tangy and thick. You're told it's a type of fish paste. You don't try it. You've suffered enough. Your host ladles a portion of stew into a bowl and hands it to you. It's hot. It's greyish-brown. It smells like garlic, old carrots, and maybe socks. You sip, and it's not awful. You expected worse. The heat helps. So does the salt. There's something chewy in it you pray is a root vegetable. Could also be tendon. You don't ask. After the meal, cleanup is minimal. The bowls are wiped out with a crust of bread. The pot is refilled without being scrubbed. The floor is swept, sort of, by kicking the straw into a new pattern. It's not clean, not really. But it's back to medieval baseline, which is good enough. And now, the dishes. Or rather, the people who are the dishes. Everyone licks their fingers. One child licks the bowl. Someone else hands the trench bread to the dog, who devours it with joy. You start to realise that hygiene here isn't about eliminating germs. It's about keeping them contained enough to not ruin dinner. As you help carry firewood inside, you notice your tunic once again smells like smoke and broth and desperation. You'll be sleeping with it tonight. It will become part of you. You collapse on your mat, stomach half full, hands gritty with flour and soot. There's a strange comfort in the chaos. The food might be bland, the fire might kill you, but for now you're warm, fed and alive. And in this world, that's more than most can say. You're just starting to doze off after another smoke-flavoured dinner, and one more minor argument with Harold the ankle infection, when the door bursts open and a gust of cold air slaps the warmth right out of the room. A man stumbles inside, mud up to his knees, beard crusted with frost, eyes wide. "They're here," he gasps. "They're coming through again." Everyone in the room goes still. You sit up not because you understand what's happening, but because the fear is instant and contagious. Your host grabs a heavy cloak and shoves it into your arms. "Outside," she says, her voice quiet and urgent. "We need to hide the grain." Grain? 10 minutes later, you're ankle deep in frozen mud, hauling sacks of barley into a hollow dug beneath a collapsed section of fence, while someone else scatters old hay over the opening. This is not a drill. This is medieval taxation, or more accurately extraction. The Lord's men are coming, which means everything not nailed down, and even some things that are, might get taken. You've stumbled into the filthiest, pettiest, most relentless part of medieval life, feudal obligations, or, as you've come to think of them, pay rent, give food, provide service, don't die. Not necessarily in that order. Back inside the cottage, a few coins are being stuffed into a hollow beam above the hearth. Chickens are herded into a back room. A pair of boots is hidden in a basket under straw. "They'll take anything that looks new," your host mutters, pulling off her necklace and tucking it into the folds of her shift. You nod. You've seen this kind of thing before, in dystopian films, in grim novels. But here, it's just Thursday. There's a knock at the door, not even a hard one. Just a soft, bored knock like someone asking for tea. But it feels like a cannon blast. Your host opens it with practiced resignation. Two men stand outside, one in a fur-lined cloak too fine for this village, the other holding a ledger, already half open. They step inside without greeting, eyes scanning the room with the precision of hawks spotting a limp mouse. They don't look cruel exactly, just tired. Bureaucracy with boots. "Payment," the ledgerman says. No flourish, no explanation, just that. What follows is a strange performance. Your host hands over a bundle of dried fish wrapped in cloth. The man grunts, notes it in his book. "Barley?" he asks. She shrugs. "Poor harvest." He makes a face like someone who's heard that 100 times this week. He asks about tools, goats, wool. She's vague. He's not convinced. You try to blend into the wall, but one of them notices you. "Who's this?" he asks. Your host doesn't miss a beat. "My cousin, from up north." The man narrows his eyes, looks soft. You clench your jaw. You want to say something brave, something clever, but all that comes out is a sheepish cough, which, thanks to the stew, sounds suspiciously like a death rattle. The man flinches and takes a step back. Perfect. They leave a few minutes later with the fish, a clay bowl, and a coil of rope that definitely didn't belong to them. Your host doesn't argue. She just sighs and latches the door. And that's the reality here. Ownership is conditional. You farm your own land, but the crops aren't yours. You raise animals, but the wool is spoken for. You collect wood, but some of it has to go to the Lord's manor or the monastery or the taxman or whoever else shows up first. Feudalism isn't just a system, it's a lifestyle, and it's exhausting. Here's your quirky fact for the night. Some peasants actually owed their lords eggs as part of their yearly dues. Not money, not labour, eggs. Specific counts too, like 13 eggs and 2 hens on the feast day of St. Cuthbert. Miss it. That's a fine. Not enough eggs? That's 2 days' labour in the field. It was less economics and more elaborate daylight robbery in a robe. And the fun didn't stop with food. There were obligations to grind your grain only at the Lord's mill, with a hefty fee, bake your bread in his oven, and press your grapes, if you had any, in his wine press. If he didn't have those things, tough. You still paid. It was like subscribing to a streaming service that didn't actually stream anything, but still charged you per month, per device, and per mood. There's scholarly debate, of course, about how exploitative feudalism truly was. Some argue that in small villages these relationships were more cooperative than coercive, a kind of dirty socialism where survival meant sharing. Others point to records of peasants being fined for things like collecting fallen branches without permission. You can decide for yourself when you're elbow deep in mud hiding barley from a man with a ledger. Later that night, someone in the village plays a pipe. just a slow, simple tune that winds through the smoke like a lullaby. A few people gather outside by the dying fire, eating soup from shared bowls, telling stories about lords who fell off horses or were chased by geese. It's petty. It's perfect. You realise something strange. They laugh. Despite it all, the endless work, the absurd taxes, the risk of starvation or infection or taxation with a side of insult, they laugh. Not because life is good, but because it has to be. Humour is a survival mechanism here, a kind of rebellion. One bowl of thin soup, 2 laughs, and the weight of feudalism lightens just enough to breathe. You lie down later with the fire low and the air thick with cabbage and defeat, but you're oddly comforted. You made it through the day without being fined, pressed into forced labour, or losing your only tunic. That counts. Tomorrow the ledger man might return, or someone worse. But tonight, you sleep with your boots under the bed and your coins in the floorboards. Because in the Middle Ages, security isn't a lock, it's a hiding place. You're barely awake when your host tosses a burlap sack at your feet and says, "We're going to the leper house." Come on, no preamble, no warning. Just a casual, soul-rattling sentence like that. You sit up, rubbing crust from your eyes and trying to decide whether she just spoke in metaphors. She didn't. You're really going. She sees your hesitation and shrugs. Someone's got to bring food. They won't come into the village, not anymore. And with that, she ties her cloak, lifts the sack, which now smells unmistakably of onions, salted fish and mild despair, and walks out the door. You follow, because at this point, you've lost the will to resist. Or maybe because part of you wants to know just how far down the medieval hygiene hole goes. Spoiler alert, it's deeper. Much deeper. You pass the outskirts of the village, fields giving way to woods, trees pressing in with that damp, mossy silence that always feels like they know something you don't. Your host walks quickly, eyes ahead, as if she's trying not to think too hard about where she's going, or maybe trying not to feel too much. Finally, you reach the place. It's a crumbling stone structure tucked beneath a copse of trees, half swallowed by ivy and thyme. Not quite a house, not quite a ruin, just enough shelter to keep out the worst of the wind and rain. Inside, it's dark and quiet and wrong in a way that seeps under your skin. This is the leper house, or what's left of it. Let's clear something up quickly. Not everyone in here actually has leprosy, or more accurately Hansen's disease. That word got thrown around a lot in the Middle Ages to describe a wide variety of skin conditions, rashes and degenerative diseases. If it made your skin peel, flake or fall off, congratulations. You were now a leper, and society wanted you far away. Your host sets the sack just outside the doorway and steps back. She doesn't go in. She never does. Instead, she clears her throat and says loudly, "Food." From Madeline. Then she waits. A few seconds pass. Then a figure appears in the shadows. You try not to stare. You fail. The man is hunched, wrapped in layers of cloth so thick he looks like a walking laundry pile. His face is mostly covered, but what you can see is heartbreaking. His nose is gone, or nearly. One hand is bandaged, the other holds a stick, and he doesn't speak. Just nods once and drags the sack inside. Your host turns. "We don't linger," she says. "You follow." On the way back, she explains in quiet tones how the villagers still feed them. Out of obligation, out of pity, out of the faint hope that doing so buys protection from whatever curse they think caused it all in the first place. Some believe it's a punishment for sin. Others say it's a bad wind. Still others blame fish. Yes, fish. You've learned not to question medieval logic too hard. Here's your fringe fact of the day. Lepers were often required to carry a wooden clapper or bell to announce their presence so that others could avoid them. Some wore special cloaks. Others had to walk only on certain paths, sleep only in designated shelters, or even dig their own graves in advance, just in case. Leprosy was less a disease and more a sentence. You weren't just sick, you were unclean. And here's the real kicker. Most people didn't understand how it spread. Some thought it was touch. Others believed it could travel by air, through sight, or even by looking at a leper too long. You think about that man in the cloak and how quickly he retreated into the shadows, and it hits you. He's not just sick, he's invisible, forgotten. There's a scholarly debate about just how cruel these systems were. Some argue that medieval leper houses weren't entirely about exclusion. They were a kind of social safety net, a place to receive care, food, and spiritual guidance, even if it came wrapped in fear. Others insist that these places were just long, slow waiting rooms for death, out of sight, out of mind. You pass a roadside shrine on the way back and your host kneels to light a small candle. You ask who it's for. All of them, she says simply. Back in the village, no one talks about where you went. No one asks. There's an understanding here. Some things are seen, but not discussed. A kind of collective denial wrapped in politeness. Someone hands you a bowl of soup and changes the subject to sheep prices. You sit near the hearth that night thinking about the man in the leper house, about how his face was barely visible, but his presence, his absence, lingers. He's there. Always. Just outside the circle of warmth, just beyond the reach of comfort. Like a shadow everyone agrees not to see. You scratch your ankle absently, Harold still hanging on, and wonder how many people were sent to places like that for less. A rash, a cough, a crooked limb. It didn't take much. In a world where health was mystery and misfortune was seen as moral failure, it was terrifyingly easy to become an outcast. You lie down on your straw mat, suddenly aware of every blister, every itch, every cough you've picked up since arriving. And then you remember. You look soft, remember? The man with the ledger said so. Tomorrow you'll look harder, dirtier. You'll walk faster, with your head down, like everyone else. Because if there's one lesson you've learned, it's this. In the Middle Ages, survival isn't just about avoiding plague or starvation. It's about staying visible, but just barely. Seen enough to be human. Not so much that they start to fear you. By now you've surrendered all hope of escaping the filth. It clings to you like a second skin, one that's damp and vaguely scented with whatever died under the cottage last month. Your socks, if you can call them that, are basically soft armour made from layers of wool, grime and despair. Harold the ankle infection has expanded his territory. You think he's annexed a toe, maybe two. You try not to look. But today isn't about you. Today is about something worse than filth, worse than the rats, worse even than leprosy. Today is about justice, which in the Middle Ages is just a fancy word for please look away while we do something horrifying. Word spreads fast in the village. Someone has been accused of theft, a chicken to be exact. You laugh at first. You shouldn't have. A stolen chicken here is not a minor offence. It's not a slap on the wrist. It's survival level serious. That bird may have been a month's meals, a barter chip, or someone's only source of eggs during the winter. Here, property isn't just property. It's life or death. And when you mess with someone's survival, the consequences don't exactly come with appeals and court-appointed lawyers. You follow the villagers, a growing, murmuring crowd heading toward the village square, or more accurately, the wide, muddy patch near the well where goats usually poop. A makeshift wooden platform has been set up, barely knee-high. A few men stand around it, trying to look authoritative in clothes that are as torn and patched as everyone else's. One of them wears a badge. It doesn't help. The accused stands off to the side, hands bound, face red and streaked with dirt. He's shaking. A teenager, maybe 17. He looks like he hasn't eaten in days. You recognise him. He slept in the corner of the church last week, always quiet, never made eye contact. You expect a trial, or at least a loud accusation, but no. A woman steps forward, holding a dead chicken by the legs. She throws it on the ground like it's Exhibit A in the world's most depressing courtroom. "Mine," she says, voice cracking. "He took it. Caught him running with it." The boy mumbles something, no one listens. The man with the badge doesn't even raise his voice. "Third theft this month," he says. "He'll lose a hand." You blink. A hand? Surely they're not serious. They are. They're always serious. Here's your historical truth bomb for the night. Medieval justice was swift, brutal, and rarely interested in nuance. Petty thefts could mean branding, mutilation, or exile. Repeat offenders were lucky to get out alive. There was no forensic analysis, no burden of proof. If the community believed you were guilty, or just didn't like your face, you were out of luck and probably out of fingers. And it gets quirkier. Some punishments involved being publicly displayed in stocks, pelted with whatever people could find. Others involved the cucking stool, for public humiliation, or the scold's bridle. A metal cage for the head with a plate that pressed down on the tongue. Women got it worse, of course. Being too loud was a punishable offence. You sneeze too confidently around the wrong man, and you might end up muzzled. Back in the square, the air has turned cold. The boy's on his knees now. He's not begging, just waiting. Maybe for mercy. Maybe for someone to say, "Hey, how about we don't dismember a teenager over poultry?" No one does. The executioner, or as close as you get to one in a village this size, is a stocky man with a hammer and a rusty cleaver. You want to scream, you want to step forward, but you don't. No one does. This isn't a place where outsiders speak up, this is a place where silence is safety. The man kneels beside the boy, grabs his wrist and places it flat on a block of wood. There's no ceremony, no last words. Then, thud. You flinch. So does everyone else. A pause, a cry. Blood. A woman nearby crosses herself. A child starts crying. The boy collapses sideways, clutching the stump. They wrap it quickly, roughly. The punishment is done. Justice, such as it is, has been served. The chicken is dead. The hand is gone, and the balance of suffering has been restored temporarily. The boy is dragged away. He'll live, probably. If the wound doesn't fester, if the coal doesn't take him first, if Harold doesn't move in. There's a scholarly debate about how civilized medieval justice actually was. Some argue that harsh public punishments kept order in lawless times. Others point out that they were performative and often served more to reinforce social hierarchies than to deliver true fairness. You're leaning toward the latter as you watch the blood seep into the mud. Later that evening, the village is eerily quiet. People speak in whispers. No one brings up the boy. No one mentions the cleaver or the block. The woman who owned the chicken cooks a stew and pretends it tastes better than it does. You sit by the hearth, arms wrapped around your knees, thinking about laws written by men in towers and enforced by men in mud, about how a hungry kid can be worth less than a bird, and about how fast justice forgets mercy when you're poor, dirty and alone. Your host finally breaks the silence. "Shouldn't have taken it," she says, voice low, not cruel, just tired. As if she's said it 100 times before and will say it 100 times again. You nod, because what else is there to say? That night you sleep restlessly, dreams filled with hammers and feathers, and you realise you haven't seen a cat since you got here. You haven't seen a single cat. Probably outlawed, probably eaten, or maybe they just knew better than to stick around. Maybe cats, clever as they are, took one look at medieval justice and decided to live somewhere else. So, you made it. Barely. You've slept in straw that was probably alive, you've eaten food that actively resisted digestion, you've hosted multiple colonies of lice, and Harold the ankle infection became something of a long-term companion. You watched a birth. You smelled a leper house. You nearly lost your soul to a communal tub filled with strange floating particles that may or may not have been soup ingredients. And through it all, somehow, you didn't perish from dysentery, get accused of heresy, or lose a limb to tax enforcement. Congratulations. The truth is, you wouldn't survive the Middle Ages, not without some serious internal rewiring and an immune system forged from iron, soot and goat breath. Everything smells, everything's damp, every bit of life is borrowed against death. But weirdly, it all works. Sort of. People endure, they love, they joke, they eat burnt stew and laugh about it. They bury their dead and still make room to dance afterward. It's grim, it's raw, and it's real. And now, as the last embers in the hearth crackle low and the village quiets around you, you settle deeper into your scratchy wool blanket, skin itchy, lungs slightly smoky, hair tangled into its own ecosystem, and somehow in the flickering candlelight you feel peaceful. Not clean, never clean, but peaceful. You've survived the filth. You've seen the beauty that grows in the cracks, and you've earned your rest. Now go ahead, let your eyes close, breathe in that faint scent of sheep and ash, and drift off to sleep knowing that when you wake up, it will be in a world with toothpaste, laundry machines, and private bathrooms. You're truly, deeply blessed.